Should I know, ma'am? Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, tradition, ma'am. Try reading. Om Shri Sai Ram. I offer my most humble and reverential salutations at the divine lotus feet of our beloved founder Chancellor, Bhagwan Shri Satya Sai Baba. Honorable Chancellor Sir Shri K. Chakravarti, Vice Chancellor Sir Professor C. Sanjeevi, revered Registrar Sir Professor B. Sai Giridhar, Controller of Examinations Sir Sanjay Sahani, Directors of all the campuses of the Institute, respected Deans and Heads of various departments, Professors, distinguished speakers, research scholars, students, and all the participants with a flair for literature who have joined us virtually today. Sairam and greetings from the Sri Satyasai Institute of Higher Learning. I deem it a great pleasure to extend to all a hearty welcome to the second edition of LitRead, a webinar series on life, language, and literature. Let's start the day's proceedings with the lighting of a lamp, praying to the Almighty to lead us from untruth to truth, darkness to light, and from mortality to immortality. I invite Professor C. Sanjeevi, Vice Chancellor of the Institute, Director of Prashantinilayam Campus, Dr. Raghavendra Raju, and Head Department of Languages and Literature, Dr. Rani PL, to light the lamp. Now we shall have the invocatory Vedam chanting by the students of SSSIHL from the men's campuses at Brindavan, Prashanti Nilayam, and Mudanahalli.
ॐ भूमिर्भूम्नाद्यौर्वरिणान्तरिक्षं महित्वा उपस्थिते देव्यदितेऽग्निमन्नादमन्नाध्यायादधे आयङ्गौ पृश्निरक्रमेदसनन्मातरं पुनः पितरं च प्रयन्सुवः त्रिगुं सद्धाम विराजति वाक्पतङ्गाय शिश्रिये प्रत्यस्य वहद्युभिः अस्य प्राणादपानत्यन्तश्चरतिरोचना व्यक्यन्महिषः सुवः यत्त्वा आक्रुद्धः परोवपमञ्जुना यदवर्त्या सुकल्पमग्ने तत्तव पुनस्त्वोदीपयामसि यत्ते मञ्जुपरो तस्य पृथिवीमनुदध्वसे.
O goddess Aditi, you are the earth in depth, sky in breadth, and atmosphere in vastness. I place the fire, the consumer of wood, in your lap. The spaces between the worlds rebound with the sound of the bird at the dawn. O fire, if I have disturbed and scattered you out of my anger or misfortune, condescend to bear with me. We kindle you again.
आदित्या विश्वे तद्देवा वसवश्च समाभरन् मनो ज्योतिर्जुषतामाज्यं विच्छिन्नं यज्ञगं समिमं दधातु बृहस्पतिस्तनुतामिमन्नो विश्वे देवा इह मादयन्ताम् मेदिनी देवी वसुन्धरा स्याद्वसुधा देवी वासवी ब्रह्मवर्चसः पितृणागश्रोत्रं चक्षुर्मनः देवी हिरण्यगर्भिणी देवी प्रसूपरी सदने सत्यायने सीदा समुद्रवती सावित्री हनो देवी मह्यङ्गी महीधरणी महो व्यतिष्ठा शृङ्गे शृङ्गे यज्ञे यज्ञे विभीषिणी इन्द्रपत्नी व्यापिनी सुरसरिदिहा वायुमती जलशयनी श्रियन्धाराजा सत्यन्धोपरिमेदिनी स्वोपरिधत्तं परिगाया.
The Adityas, the Vasus, and all angels gather to bring you together. Mind,
An English critic and writer, Cyril Connolly, had said, while thought exists, An English critic and writer, Cyril Connolly, had said, while thought exists, words are alive, and literature becomes an escape, not from, but into living. In the present day world, filled with technological advancements, where people place more focus on logic, empirics, and reason, with very little place for the matters of heart, it is time for all of us to take a pause, reflect on life, objectively view ourselves closely from within. Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba says, greatness does not lie in bringing out books, but in understanding the essence contained in the books. Without matter, it cannot be called a book. Without any subject, you cannot get matter. What type of subjects you should choose? You should choose those subjects which are related to the heart. If you do not go by the dictates of the heart, you will not be successful. We come across millions of books and articles throughout the year. What we see are end products, completed, proofread, and perfect. The author remains unseen, and so do the efforts that go into writing and publishing. Many dream of writing a book, but only some get the opportunity to publish their manuscripts and make it available to a wider audience. Self publishing is an art in itself that requires great skills and efforts. So that brings us to the question, what exactly is the formula to become a successful author and a self publisher? With the booming influence of digital technology and the incurable information overload, with trailers announcing and publicizing books, it has become tougher to withstand the competition. So, this webinar is not just for literature enthusiasts, but also for all those who wish to know the process of writing. Here we are, the Department of English Language and Literature from Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, bringing to you a one-day webinar on exploring authorpreneurship. Stay tuned and be with us today to derive invaluable inputs from the eminent authors. To begin with, I welcome Professor Rajeshwari C. Patel, Director, Sri Satyasai Institute of Higher Learning, Anandpur campus, to deliver the welcome address and set the stage. Madam did her BA from SSSIHL and was awarded the Best All-Round Student, which she received from Bhagwan Baba in the year 1977. After completing MA in English from Sri Krishna Devaraya University, Anantapur, with a first rank, Madam went on to pursue her PhD on W.B. Yeats and the ideal of unity of being from Sri Krishna Devaraya University, Anantapur. Madam has over 35 years of rich teaching experience and is also the recipient of the Sai Krishna Award for Excellence in Research. Former head Department of English and Dean of Economics and Humanities, Professor Patel has been a member of many important administrative bodies. She has participated in many conferences and seminars and has many publications in national and international journals to her credit. Madam has guided many PG, MPhil, and PhD dissertations. She is a proficient script writer and has directed and acted in many dramas. Madam is also a natural orator and has addressed several spiritual, secular, and academic gatherings. My privilege to hand over the stage to you, Madam.
Thank you very much. I offer my loving salutations to my Divine Master, Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Sanjeevi Sir, the Registrar, Professor Sai Giridhar Sir, the Control of Examinations, Sri Sanjay Sahani Sir, esteemed guest speakers, senior faculty, teachers, research scholars, students, and all those who have logged in to this webinar. Warm greetings to all of you. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar on exploring authorpreneurship, organized by the Department of English, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. The topic of this webinar is, in a sense, outside my chosen area, because I am a literature person who likes to read and critically analyze literary texts, whereas authorpreneurship is all about publishing one's own creative work. However, when I was asked by the head of department, Dr. P.L. Rani, to be a part of this webinar, I agreed to make some introductory remarks. As a teacher, whenever I discuss a literary work, be it a poem, a prose piece, drama, or novel, I habitually tell my students about the struggle that writers go through to get their work published. The reason I do that is I believe it is important for young, aspiring people to know something about the complex journey of a writer from struggle to success before they can appreciate the text. While creative writing is not easy, it has its ordeals and trials. Bad patches, followed by a sudden eureka moment, or shall we call it technically epiphany. Our students need to be familiar with that, of course, but they also need to know what it means when a writer's work is not recognized, when the work is not accepted for publication. I hope most of you who are attending this webinar have read the novel Little Women. I remember Jo March, a character in this novel. She had a passion for storytelling, but the newspaper editors and publishers she went to rejected her work several times. She was asked to change the storyline or the content to suit the publishers. New authors, even the best of them, have had a hard time getting their work published if they don't have connections. The classic example is of J.K. Rowling. She has sold more than 450 million copies of the Harry Potter series, and today she's worth around $1 billion. But we all know her story. She sent the manuscript of her novel to 12 different publishers. All of them rejected her work. Just imagine, 12 different publishers. Finally, a Bloomsbury editor picked up the manuscript and gave an advance of just £1,500. Why? The editor didn't think she would be able to sell her book. So he suggested she get a teaching job, as it was unlikely that she would earn a living from writing. And yet, we now know that the book went on to become one of the best-selling series in history, with over 450 million copies purchased worldwide. I always think that Rowling's story is inspirational. In fact, what comes to mind is her comment on this trying period, a comment that can be applied to life in general. She said about that time of her life, "It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default." So her story tells us not to give up. In a sense, earlier than that, there's the example of Stephen King, who submitted the draft of his story Carrie. And when he did that, the publisher passed it over with the comment, "We are not interested in science fiction, and especially not science fiction which deals with negative utopias." So the manuscript was rejected 30 times. Mind you, 30 times before being picked up by Doubleday. It went on to sell over 1 million copies and became a successful film as well. After that, Stephen King published over 54 novels and 200 short stories and won numerous awards for his contributions to literature. Another example that comes to mind is that of the famous Agatha Christie. She completed her first manuscript at the age of 22. She submitted it to many publishers. Each of them rejected her work. Finally, she was introduced to a literary agent who rejected this manuscript but suggested that she write a second novel. As a result, Agatha Christie's first novel was never published. Her second novel was also repeatedly rejected before being finally published after she agreed to change the ending. As you all know, especially those of you who are avid readers of detective fiction, Agatha Christie went on to have a prolific career. She wrote 72 novels and 15 short story collections. Stick to your teaching, Miss Alcott. You can't write. Those were the words of one publisher who passed over the manuscript for Little Women. Because the character I mentioned in the beginning, Jo March, is in a way a character that represents the novelist herself. So the publisher told Miss Alcott, "You can't write." Alcott ignored his advice, and the book went on to be well received, with one reviewer stating it was the very best of books to reach the hearts of the young of any age from 6 to 60. It is still a classic 150 years later. So, what I would like to state here is that publishing one's work has been a great challenge for many writers. But it is not a new phenomenon. The new age solution to the problem is the emergence of authorpreneurs who not only surmount many hurdles to author a work, but also take up the uphill task of publishing what they have written. He or she decides to be an author as well as a business person or entrepreneur, that is, in the business of book publishing. Of course, it is also one different kind of challenge. You may need to spend more time with marketing your work than writing it, but at least you don't have to face the rejections, the disappointments, and the sleepless nights. What if there are failures? What if your book doesn't sell? Or if you don't have evaluators who can access the target audience? Will entrepreneurship result in any person or every person publishing his or her book, even if the quality gets compromised? Publishers usually employ editors to check the contents of a book before accepting it for publication. So, do we have the wherewithal to take the risks? These and many more other issues will be discussed in the course of this webinar. I look forward to the talks and presentations by authors and experts in this field, those who have proved their mettle in authorpreneurship. I welcome you once again to the webinar on exploring authorpreneurship. Thank you, Sairam.
Thank you, madam, for enlightening us on the complex journey of a writer, the struggle to success, and the perseverance required in the process. I now invite Dr. D. Bhargavi, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to introduce the speaker for the next session. Morning greetings to all. first session in today's proceedings is the much awaited interview with Mr. Shivarur. Those who are regular with news would know him, and those that aren't should know him. Shivarur, an author, a defense journalist, a senior editor, and an anchor par excellence in India today, needs no introduction whatsoever. However, I take this wonderful opportunity to say a few words about him. Mr. Aror has a BA Honours in English and an MA in International Journalism from the St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and Cardiff University. He is an extremely passionate defense and military enthusiast who has been reporting on national security for over a decade from the defense zones such as Kashmir, Sri Lanka, and Libya. He also runs a defense website called lifeisdefense.com, founded in 2007, which won Defense IQ Blogging Awards in the category Regional Defense Blog in 2012 and 2013. He authored the popular book Operation Jinnah in 2017 and co-authored with Rahul Singh India's Most Fearless in 2018 and the sequel of the same in 2019. Humility despite ability, passion for work, and eloquence in expression is what defines Mr. Arur at his profession. Mr. Arur will be interviewed by Dr. Siddhartha Raju, Assistant Professor, Department of English Language and Literature, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, Prashant Nilayam campus. Dr. Raju joined SSSIHL as a faculty member in 2011, an inspiring teacher and a versatile member of the university fraternity. In the year 2016, he was awarded the Sai Krishna Award for Excellence in Teaching by Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. He received his doctoral degree in the area of post-colonial literature. His core interests also lie in pop culture studies. His other engagements at the university include coordinating the drama presentations, music programs, and sporting events. My pleasure to invite you both, Mr. Shivarur and Dr. Siddhartha Raju. Thank you.
Good morning, Shiv. Can we just do
Good
a
morning,
check of
Siddharth.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great to see you and you all.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Offering my reverential salutations at the lotus feet of my most beloved master. Serendipity. It is such a beautiful word because it has an air of mystery around it. If Loyola College, Chennai, hadn't said their admissions were closed, Shiv would not have become the pride of St. Stephen's College, Delhi. A chance gap in a particular department in Indian Express led him to where he is today. It is no exaggeration to say political reporting's loss is the gain of defense reporting, a benchmark even. Shiv shows us the power of using words as your ammunition, whether it is on the platform of Twitter where your characters are limited, or the broadcast studio, or the pages that he fills in his books. Shiv, a change in the seat that you sit in, I will take yours today, hoping to pick your brain and expose our audience today to what it is like to be a successful niche writer in India today, pun intended. I propose to do the interview in two halves, Shiv. The first half, I hope we can cover the writing process itself. Yes, Shiv, you wanted to say something?
Go ahead, Siddharth. Finish,
Okay.
then I'll talk. Yeah.
Okay. So you are primarily a journalist and an editor. So how do you find time to play the writer?
Okay, that's a very, very good question and one that doesn't have a complete answer just yet. I'm audible, right, Siddharth? Everyone can hear me?
Yes. Loud and
And
clear.
the war for time is a constant struggle. And I think it's not unique to me. All writers face this unless they're lucky enough to be full-time writers. And even then, I think they struggle. I've heard full-time writers struggling with how to compartmentalize their time. But I think it takes the only thing it really takes is a kind of almost dogged sort of discipline where you commit a certain number of hours each day or each weekend or one day in a week to the writing process. And Siddharth, you and I go back a long way. We've known each other as kids, and you know that I have no discipline at all. So you can imagine how difficult this process has been for me to get all this discipline into my life. But once you have publishers, into the equation, when once you've got deadlines and things like that, and as a journalist, we work well with deadlines. It becomes almost imperative to give your work a certain amount of time each day or each week. So that's the only thing. But I think the short answer to that question is that it's a constant struggle. It's not like I've won the war on compartmentalizing between being a journalist and being an author. It's still a very, very difficult process. In fact, right now, I'm working on my third book, and with everything that's happening in the country right now, the pandemic, the Ladakh situation, all those things, you can imagine how I'm sort of being stretched in many different directions. So it's a it's an uphill battle all the time. That's the real truth.
Our teachers who teach linguistics in our university will be very impressed to see your register is all about war. It's a war against time. I'm fighting the battle. There's a dog fight. Yeah, so I guess you can't take it out of you, isn't it? Shiv, everyone who follows you in the media knows how Lifeist is where it all began. You even call it your good Frankenstein in one of your interviews. So, is blogging the right place to start for budding writers?
Siddharth, that's again a very good question. Blogging is something that has existed for quite a while now, and as most of us know, you don't even need a formal platform anymore to actually write and have an audience. Some of the most popular writers today, and not talking about the earlier generation, but of today, are people who've made use of available platforms online, blogging or YouTube or whatever it is. But the world has changed enormously since Lifeist began. Just to put that into perspective, because I'm guessing our audience today are all young budding writers. Lifeist began in 2007, and there was a very specific reason for it. I was making a shift from newspaper journalism to television journalism, and the writer in me was very apprehensive. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm making this switch to television. Will I be able to continue writing? Because by then I had sort of established my name as a print journalist, and people in the industry, defense industry, knew who I was. So I was scared. I was saying, I don't think anybody who reads a newspaper watches TV. So I was a little scared about that. And that's why I started Lifeist. And it was just a blog. It was free. I could write anytime I wanted. Nobody was sitting on my head. But I was fortunate enough that at the time that I started Lifeist, I think blogging was sort of just taking its birth, and there was a huge, enormous vacuum, Siddharth, of defense journalism in India, of the kind and the energy that a blog can provide. Anytime stories, overnight stories, exclusives, a kind of irreverent tone, asking really difficult questions that you might not otherwise ask in a newspaper because of various different compulsions. And so, like you said, it was a good Frankenstein monster. It absolutely exploded. It's been 14 years now, and it's just grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And therefore, I could never sort of put it aside and say, okay, I'm done with this. I don't have time for you, because it's too big to shut down. So, the answer to your question would be absolutely. If anyone wants to write, and this is something I tell people all the time. If you've got that itch to write, do so. You've got amazing audience driven platforms right now. Not just blog. Blog to me sounds like a kind of arcane word these days, because it was something that was in when I was doing my formative years in journalism. But you've got blogs. Of course, you've got blogs. You've got various different beautiful writing platforms, which are way beyond just blogging. They provide a great deal of interactivity. There are things like Substack and newsletter apps. There is, of course, social media, and lots of people look down on social media and shun it as a distraction. I'm just at the opposite end of the spectrum. I believe social media is about where you get your audience. It's where you're going to be interacting with the people who will probably be reading your stuff. So I would tell all of your young viewers today at your institution that use writing platforms online. That most of them are free. If you've got something to say, don't be afraid to use social media to express your thoughts. Like I said, it's a changed world. It's a different world. You'll have to tune your thoughts towards the topics of the day, the things that are I don't really like the word viral, but things that people are talking about a lot these days. Try and be part of those conversations. Have thoughts about what's changing our country, our world today, because let's face it, that's what those are the avenues that will allow you a larger audience, because people want to read and watch things that are about the things that are happening currently around them, and not something that's too obscure or vague. So absolutely, please do use all of the tools available, at least in the interim, at least until you can get into a sort of
Right.
formal establishment where you can actually practice writing, like a newspaper or a magazine. Or I mean, that wall between television and print is gone now, because all organizations have digital arms. So absolutely use everything that's available, and there's an absolute wealth of beautiful platforms, facilities, apps out there that can sort of light up your writing. So absolutely, please do use them.
Okay. Now coming to your own career trajectory, from journalism to creative writing, it's a paradigm shift. Of course, we know that you were involved in creative writing. You used to write poetry back in the day, but from a career perspective, right? You've moved from journalism to creative writing, because that's a big shift. So where did it all begin?
Well, the confession that I'll have to make over there is that I probably would never have written. Uh, I've written one novel, a fiction novel, as you know, Siddharth, and it's called Operation Jinnah. It's a military thriller fiction novel, and I probably would never have written it. It was never there in my head. I wasn't planning to write it. It wasn't something that was inside me waiting to explode out. But a friend of mine who had co-founded a publishing house, uh, she came to me and she said, "Listen, we really want you to be one of our launch authors." And initially I fought it a great deal, but after a while she said, "Listen, we want it to be an India-Pakistan story, and with all the in the world that you inhabit, soldiers and special forces and the LOC and things like that." And so that provided the kind of I think the spark that triggered a big story in my head. I'd covered the 26/11 terror attack in Mumbai as well, so uh, I guess there was something that was kindled in me, if you will, to tell a story that sort of grew from that terror attack. And so that's what this novel is really all about. It's about a kind of a retributive mission post 26/11. So I had a lot of what I had covered there, and I guess in a sense what I'd like to see happen beyond that. So uh, I think that's where it actually happened. So like you said, I have done creative writing in the past as well, even though that was kind of put on the shelf for many years because of the demands of real world journalism and things like that. But yeah, it felt really good to kind of get back into that. But I'll tell you, it's 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 the most difficult thing to do. Fiction writing, I mean, I have a great amount of respect for fiction writers, who are the true creative writers. Even though all writing is essentially creative, but fiction writing is difficult because not only are you creating the story, but you're also crafting it and shaping it. You literally are a parent of the entire thing. At least in nonfiction, you have matter to work with, but here everything is yours. You're playing God quite literally on pages. So it was difficult, I won't lie, but it was extremely fulfilling. And I honestly don't know. I mean, the readers of my novel are constantly asking me when the sequel is going to be, because if anyone's read my novel, it kind of ends on a little bit of an open-ended way, so indicating a sequel. But I don't know when I'm going to have the time or the energy to get into a sequel for that. But yeah, very difficult. It was a very difficult switch.
Now, I asked this question because one of your genres is real life events. India's most fearless, it's storyfying real life events, which is very close to journalism itself because you are just representing facts as they are. Of course, you're weaving a story around it. But on the other hand, like you said, Operation Jinnah being a fictional work. So I was just interested to know how did you manage the switch? And of course, I'm glad I asked you that question, and I'm sure some of the points that you made would have definitely kindled some ideas in our viewers. Now let's go through the process itself, Shiv, the writing process itself. Now I have read your works, and I must tell you that the title, India's Most Fearless, it's a very apt title because, of course, of the content. But as a reader, you need to be brave to pick up that book. I think you have to exhibit a little bit of bravery to be able to go through the and the stories that you're conveying. And honestly, I must admit that I have never gone past one full chapter. If I have finished a full chapter at a stretch, and I'm talking this to the viewers as well. If you finish one full chapter, you can't proceed to the next, because of course each of them being standalone incidents of acts of bravery by our warriors of the forces, but the impact that it makes on you, it's not possible to read it as just an account and move ahead to the next story. You have to come back to the real world. You have to let the mundane occupy your mind before you can pick up and read another story. So I just want to talk to you about the process itself, Shiv. The detailing or the information that you give your reader, whether it's the technical details about the guns, the artillery, the helicopters, the planes, or even the historical events, like, for instance, that of the origins of Molotovs, right, that you mentioned. Your role as a defense editor or correspondent, it becomes an advantage when you research for such a book,
Oh,
does it?
absolutely. There's no question that having spent years as a defense journalist, the research aspect, the detailing becomes infinitely easier because like I'm not going to say defense is different from any other you know complicated field, but it does require time. It requires an investment of mind space to get into the various layers because it's a complicated subject. And having spent many years covering defense as a defense correspondent, uh, you not only have no choice but to be aware of many of these things, if not all of these things, but you also meet people, and your kind of ecosystem becomes defense. It's a very overwhelming subject, which doesn't kind of leave you space for many other things. And that's the reason why, if you notice, practically all my work is defense related. My books are defense related. My fiction novel is defense related. Life Fist is defense related. The show I do on the weekend is defense related. Most of the stories I do on air are defense related. So defense is a kind of it's a kind of amoeba that kind of just engulfs you and never lets you go. So not that I'm complaining. It's a beautiful topic which I love very much. But just to give you that sense. But yeah, absolutely. The fact that I'd covered defense for so long, Siddharth, uh, gives you not only that close in, zoomed in view of things like the nuts and bolts of weapons, the way soldiers are in operations, which is extremely complicated, but which is, yeah, and that kind of detailing is very valuable to readers because it's a world they don't inhabit, and they very much readers and viewers love, being held by the hand and taken into a world which they're not familiar with. They'd love to know more because they know soldiers, they know people at the LOC, they know that these guys and women are defending Indian, territorial integrity, but they don't know the precise little details of how it actually happens. What's the difference between a light machine gun and a medium machine gun? What's the difference between the line of control and the international border? What's the difference between a thermal imager and an infrared camera? All those little things. They love that because it's procedural, and it's a world that is familiar but not so familiar. So it's something that they love very much. But not only does defense journalism allow me to tell that detailed story better, but it also allows me to zoom out because the big picture is also really important. It allows you to kind of get a bird's eye overhead view of the situation and not only get bogged down by nitty-gritties of war fighting and weaponry and things like that, but also about the history of India and Pakistan, or the history of India and China, or about the terrible problems that soldiers face in some areas. So if you've read my books, you'll also know that these stories are very inspiring, but we also ask the tough questions, which are and those also come from within Siddharth as a defense correspondent, which is, there are some operations which should have never happened because there have been intelligence failures, or there were not enough weapons in one place, or the planning was not okay. So those questions also tend to come out in our writing, and I think those are things that only a journalist can ask. It can't be someone who's sort of parachuted into the writing process from somewhere else, because not that they wouldn't want to ask, but they may not know that those questions need to be asked. So our books are we're very certain in our minds that our books are not meant to be Bharat Mata ki Jai and have this overt kind of jingoism and patriotism, because I think that is patriotism and all those things are very innate in many of these stories. They don't need to, no amount of chest beating is necessary. And as you said, Siddharth, if you stopped reading a chapter after you read one of them and you needed time before you read the next one, that's the very same thing for us as authors, and for me as an author in the India's Most Fearless series, because these stories are many of them are shattering, they're heartbreaking, right? And they take a lot out of you. The writing process is supposed to be cathartic. It's supposed to be it's an outward process, but it leaves scars. It leaves injuries because you've put so much of your heart and soul into the writing of these heartbreaking stories that after many chapters, and there are many chapters I can name in these books where we were just left as shells of ourselves after we finished writing, because we were like, God, I can't believe I finished writing that, or how did I write that? That's such a heartbreaking, terrible story. There's nothing in that story that makes me happy, but it's a great story. It's a great, inspiring story. So yeah, it's a sort of violent clash between journalism and storytelling and narrative, which is quite fascinating. But yeah, being a journalist is a well that we draw from all the time, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
And talking about that well that you draw from as a journalist, to gather the kind of information that you have, the kind of research that you do, definitely, you need to have access to sources. So how do you gather sources? How do you cultivate them and get the scoops out of them that you do? How much ever you can divulge.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm not going to lie to you. It's not a formula process. All journalists have their own way of doing things, and the reason why this is important in the world of defense journalism is because it's, by its very nature, secretive. It's sensitive. It's classified. Most information is of a privileged nature, and therefore it's difficult. Things have changed enormously, Siddharth. I mean, when I started as a defense correspondent in 2004, my God, it was closed. Everything was completely closed. The gates were closed, the doors were closed, people's minds were closed. There was no social media. What you see about in the defense forces now is in many ways a miracle. It's a miracle because now you've all your militaries are on social media. You've got briefings all the time. You've got they're very open about telling their stories and stuff like that. You've books like mine where we've been allowed to write these stories. These are all signs of things opening up in a big deal. But when I started out, and to a certain measure, even now, when people start out as defense journalists, cultivating sources, making friends with people in the industry, people in government is a difficult process, because trust is something you work on, and whether it is scoops or sources, that's a different point, but it's difficult. There's no formula for how people get their scoops and sources. You establish a certain level of trust by your writing. I think you convey to both your readers and to your potential sources that you are a journalist who is mature, who has a certain level of responsibility, who isn't sort of chasing sensationalism. And believe me, there's a lot of potential for sensationalism in defense, because like you said, it's about war and fighting and bombs and stuff like that. So there's vast potential for exaggerating things, but all of those things can have an impact on national security. So, if you asked me about the collision between television and national security, there's an even uglier story to tell there, because the things people say on television can have real world ramifications at the line of control or elsewhere. There's been a story. I'm not going to take names, but one particular defense analyst who made a flippant comment on television during a debate about how the Indian Army had done something at the LOC in the previous few days, was watched across the LOC, and it resulted in a whole 2 or 3 brigades of infantry on the Pakistani side being activated because of one comment that was made on television. So, I mean, not to digress, but I'm just telling you, these are things that are tracked very, very carefully. So one needs to be extremely careful, even if you've got good sources, even if you've got access to scoops. I can tell you through my career, I've had dozens of scoops, Siddharth, potential scoops, which I haven't published, which I haven't put out, which I haven't reported on television, because my filters and processes tell me that if I put this out, it's going to be a huge, like, absolute bomb of a story, but but it'll have real world ramifications for the security of the country. So it's a bit of a juggle. It's a difficult one. Sometimes you're sitting on stories that keep you up at night, and you're wondering whether you're going to do that story the next day or not, because everything you do has the potential to have life and death consequences in some part of the country, at the LAC, at the LOC, in the Northeast, in Kashmir, in Ladakh, wherever. So it's difficult. One needs to go through stories with a fine-toothed comb to see, have I revealed something that I probably shouldn't reveal? I've mentioned the location of a certain gun in this story. Should I just remove that and keep it vague? So all of these things are very, very important in how your potential sources will look at you. But it's a difficult process. Establishing trust is enormously complicated. When I became a defense correspondent, it was years. I think it was 2 or 3 years before I did my first big sort of scoop. So it was 2 or 3. Yeah, I think it was 3 years, 3.5 years. It was in 2006 or 2007 that I landed my first major defense scoop. But so it's nobody's going to give you anything until they are completely comfortable with you. So it's a long and difficult process.
No, you mentioned about how you have to gain the trust, and especially in I'm sure you had to have a lot of access to the people serving in the army, the families of the army men as well, when you were researching for India's Most Fearless. But when you read the forewords by some of the most eminent people from the army, it comes across very clear that you've not just earned their trust, you've also earned their respect, because I think they really respect you for Rahul and you for having taken the effort to carve something out of something like this. Like you said, most of the chapters or most of the incidents are tragic, yes, but the fact that even that story can be used to inspire, definitely, right? So I think you've also earned the respect, and that comes across when you read their forwards to your books. Now, to quote your own book, you say, and I quote, in the course of writing India's Most Fearless 1 and 2, if there's one unshakable truth that we have come upon, it is this. If you look hard enough, every soldier has a shattering backstory. So, how do you choose from the tales of courage and bravery? The shortlisting, I would imagine, is definitely a very hard task, right? So, what comes next?
Great question, Siddharth. And yes, this is a difficult and sometimes a very it's a process that takes a lot out of you. And Rahul and I, who did this book, have a process where we draw up a long list of soldiers whose stories we'd like to tell. Many of these stories come from the Republic Day and August 15th gallantry citations, where these awards are given out. Because the army has its own internal process of awards and citations and gallantry medals. So that's the obvious place to go to, for these stories, because they already have a sort of pool of these stories. And I don't mean to sort of make it sound like a kind of shelf, but those stories are there. The army's already recognized them. So we go to those stories, and we draw up a sort of list of stories that we'd like to tell, obviously within our limitations. There are lots of limitations with that in terms of time, in terms of access. We have to split between the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. We will be telling some Coast Guard stories in the future as well. So what we do is we draw up a list. We share it with our friends in the military, and they and say that, look, we're keeping it open. If you'd like to add some or remove some, depending on how you'd like, we make the military a full participant in this whole thing. So it's not just about clearances. They, to their enormous credit, they've never censored our books. They've never asked us to change anything at all, not even locations, not even distances, nothing. They've said, this is yours. We just, we'll open the doors for you. You do the writing. But we've extended the courtesy of saying that, look, these are the stories we want to tell, but since you guys know this stuff better, if there are particular stories that you'd like to tell in this world we live in, we're happy to take some of those. So that's how we do it. It's a difficult process, Siddharth. Like I know where your question is coming from, because there are so many stories, and obviously for practical reasons we've got to limit our, impose a few restrictions. So we only do modern stories, which are basically operations that have happened in the last few years. We don't go into pre-Kargil and the older wars and things like that, because A, those have been written about in greater detail, and B, access is difficult, for people who are who made the supreme sacrifice many decades ago. To track them down is it would be a wonderful exercise, but it's a more difficult exercise when you have a publishing deadline. And believe me, India's most fearless readers are a demanding lot. There's constant pressure for when the next book is going to be out. So our publishers are kind of crack the whip as well. But the process to actually choose is we try and make it a brief one. We drop that list, we share it with the military, they give us their list, then we finalize 12 to 14 stories for each book, and then we just get cracking. But many a times the larger lists of the ones that are have not been accommodated in the current book, we try and save them for the next book. And India's Most Fearless is going to be a series of at least 6 books, and we finished 2, so there are 4 more books to go, and there probably will be more even after that. So many such stories, right?
No, I also asked this question because when I pick up books of this genre, right, there are 2 more books that I came across. One is Tales of Courage from 2611. Now, of course, they are from that one particular event, and different POVs talking about Tales of Bravery. And there is another book by one Miss Rawat, I think, the Paramveer Chakra stories.
Rachna,
so,
yes.
Right. So that talks only about those who have been awarded the Paramveer Chakra. So now it makes sense when you tell me that your reference point is the awards already being awarded by the Army, and that you work your way from there. All right, now I'm going to come to the narrative techniques that you use, because it's very Netflix type, right, to use a very contemporary term. Because where do you get that from? Because you jump in many of the scenes, many of the chapters, you jump into the scene, and then there's a flashback which leads back into that same moment where we started. So or in Operation Jinnah, for instance, the parallel scenes in the opening, they all just it's a span of a couple of minutes, right? And what's happening at the same place at the same point of time over a span of a few minutes. So tell us about picking a narrative technique, and how do you choose a narrative technique when you write?
Great observation, Siddharth. In terms of narrative technique, and I've actually thought about this, because a lot of my viewers and readers say the same thing. It's not an active process, but I think that all my years as a television journalist have basically made it imperative that I always think visually. I'm, when I'm writing, and this is actually something that I would advise many of all budding writers to think about when they do their writing, is to think about it visually. Not because it's going to be on television someday, or it doesn't even need to be. That's not the reason. I just think that when you imagine something visually, it becomes more evocative. It becomes more easy to describe and write about in your own mind. So everything that I write, and I'm talking about everything that I write, whether it's India's Most Fearless, Operation Jinnah, whatever it is, it's playing like a movie in my mind as I describe the scene. So when you're talking about those parallel events, Siddharth, that are happening at the same time, there's actually like an edit cut in my mind where I'm saying, okay, this is happening, but meanwhile, there's this other thing happening 6,000 miles away, and maybe at a later stage, I'm going to sort of describe how one of those things affected the other. So very, very visual thinking, and a visual approach to writing is a piece of advice. I'm not very good at writing advice, but since this is about creative writing, I would recommend that everyone visualizes it. One of the nice ways to do this also is to storyboard your writing. You can storyboard it. Take a sheet of paper, write down blocks of scenes, and then kind of rearrange them and see which one you want to go where. Believe me, there will be times when something that you describe later in a chapter or in a book, you'll say, hey, wait a minute, what if I bring that right up front and tease it somewhere in the beginning, and then make it like a big reveal later on. And you said Netflix, Siddharth, and you don't know how right you are, because even though you're taking the name of Netflix, believe me when I say that screenwriters are they have no choice but to write visually. But the thing that can be taken from screenwriting is that the visual process lends a certain visceral beauty, in my view, to any writing that sort of draws from because if you're thinking visually, your readers picturing it alongside you. If you have that vision as a writer, and are not just bogged down by using flowery words and constructing gorgeous sentences, I mean, all that is lovely, but if it has an add-on of a visual element that you have, your viewers will see it. So I always believe that if I'm looking at what I'm writing, whoever's going to read this is going to see that picture. They're going to plug into my brain and actually see it. The other point that you raised was about how things start in the middle of action. This is another confession I have to make, Siddharth. I am a huge fan of in media res. As literature students, you already know what that means. It's a literary phrase that means in the middle of things. And this, I think, comes from what I like to read. I'm a very impatient reader. I'm a very impatient, viewer of Netflix as well, and I like things to start bang in the middle of the action. Capture me with the core of the action right at the start, and then give me the backstory. Uh, I don't like the let's
Hook them,
go
then
from the
they're not going to
beginning.
let go, right?
I don't want to go from beginning to end in one chronology. I love disparate narrative styles. I try to use this a lot. I like using different voices, because it adds uh, a kind of elegant cacophony to the story, because you might have contradictory things to say about a certain point of view, like you said, POV. But in media res is one of my favorite narrative techniques. There are members of my family who criticize me for it. They say all your stories are in media res. You start in the middle of the action and then you give me the backstory. Just to placate some of them, in the next edition of India's Most Fearless, I have reluctantly decided to explore a couple of other narrative techniques. So there will be a couple of chapters which actually go the beginning to end style. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm a great fan of pull the viewer directly into it. There's a great joy in it, because apart from thinking visually, Siddharth, there's also great joy in kind of imagining your reader sitting next to you, saying, this is what happens now, and wait till I show you what happens right after this scene. That's another kind of technique that I use, which is like,
It's also something that we can see in news reporting, right? I mean, you give them the
oh
headlines and
yeah,
they come back after the break and we'll tell you the full story. So
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to lie. In television, is a beautiful ballet between storytelling, a little bit of sensation, teasing the viewer a little bit, getting them to stay on a little bit. Bear with me, just a few more minutes, and I'm going to show you something really big. All of that is part of storytelling, and the thing is, that's part of every novel as well, isn't it? I mean, how else are you going to get a person to sit down and read 350 pages? There's a constant bit of enticement across pages, and that is an art that comes. You're absolutely right. In television, it's very much part of your playbook, your toolkit, as it were. Even though toolkit is not a good word anymore, but yeah. So it's a fascinating way of doing things. So I would tell all creative writers to think visually. Imagine your reader sitting next to you. Don't write for anyone in mind. Say, maybe somebody will not appreciate this. Just write visually, and they'll see it. They'll see what you're seeing, and they'll love it.
I'm just going to jump to a question which I had noted for later, because we're on that note. Uh, your fictional work, we're talking about Operation Jinnah, with all its vivid descriptions, right, of especially of Kashmir, is screenplay material for someone to just go out and shoot, right? So if there was a short film director, all he needs, he has everything, right, even from the angles that and what it is that the frame needs to cover. So it's all there in your descriptions. So are the rumors of a movie based on Operation Jinnah true? And let me complete. There's a second part of the question. There is also one that you are foraying into playing a role.
Okay, let me immediately deny any rumors of me foraying into any role. Those are not true at all. And even if someone did have the not very great idea of offering me a role, I don't know if I'd have the guts to actually take it up. That's really not my domain at all. So let's get that out of the way. No, I don't think so, Siddharth. Not at this point in time. B, at this point of time, Operation Jinnah is under consideration by a couple of production houses. It was my first book, so it was way back in 2007. It's been a difficult process because it was a book that was picked up by at least two, if not three, production houses, but they didn't end up making it because, strangely, for bizarrely, it was concluded that this would be too expensive a film to make because of all the settings, because of the unmanned combat drones and the helicopters and the explosions and the submarines and missiles and stuff. So they said this is, even with CGI and everything, this is going to be a really a big budget movie. So do we really have the heart and the cash for this kind of thing? So that's why it didn't get made. But the good news it's being looked at afresh right now as a possible web series. So hopefully that will happen. But as you probably know, India's Most Fearless, many of the different chapters are being made into web series and a full-length feature film that's coming out next year.
All right. Now, being a male author, what urged you to choose a powerful female protagonist in your book, Operation Jinnah, given that terrorism and the military are essentially patriarchal in nature?
Oh yeah, that's I didn't really have any doubt in my mind, but when I started writing Operation Jinnah, it was at a time when there was quite a bit of churn in the Indian military over women in combat, over whether women were going to be given, permanent commission, and the ongoing debate even now, Siddharth, about whether women will be allowed into the frontline combat arms, infantry, and other things. It still hasn't happened. A lot of progress has been made since that time with women fighter pilots and women in the military police corps and things like that. But it hasn't gone all the way. It's a debate that's still very much on in the government, the military, and in civil society. But at that point of time, it was a pretty big thing, and I feel very strongly about it. I think there should be a level playing field. There are many who believe that the military is not a place to run gender experiments. But my point is, open the field and reject people who don't make the cut, whether they are men or women. So don't place barriers right at the gate. Open the gate, and then you decide what you want to do. Then you put a certain level of physical restrictions and things like that, and then you can bounce whoever doesn't make the cut. It doesn't matter what gender or sex they are. Having been in a situation where I was feeling very strongly about it, I thought, I have the privilege and the power to be writing a book right now. So let's do this. Let's get one. She's one of the protagonists. As you know, there are three protagonists, and I was keen that one of them was a woman. I happen to know a woman soldier who's been fighting for a very long time for the cause of women in combat. She retired from the army around that time, and she'd wanted to be in the special forces as well. So I'm not going to say the character was modeled on her, but she was definitely a very inspiring voice and force. So I think it worked out really well because the kind of feedback I got from people was like, yeah, that's how it will be. Open the doors, and you will always have the opportunity to change things, but don't discriminate right at the gate.
The idea of a female combat commando is very original and way ahead of its time, right? And I'm sure there will be a time in the future when this will be a reference. There cannot be a discussion.
I hope so. Yeah.
Now, moving on with the writing process, the progression of drafts in your writing, Shiv. What has been your method in the madness in treating your drafts?
I write in in long explosive bursts, Siddharth. I like I said, since I have a chaotic journalist's life, and time is of enormous is at an enormous premium for me when I everything's peaceful and I can sit and write. When I do write, I write in long explosive bursts. So not many people know this, but the legwork and the research and the interviews, etc. aside, I would write a full India's Most Fearless chapter in one day. Sit down and just put it out there in one big explosive sort of bout of writing. Takes a lot out of you, but that's the way I do it. I'm a little suspicious of drafts, Siddharth. I like revising. I like reading over what I've written and doing that. But I'm a person who's a very strong believer, and this may not be a recipe that suits everybody, but this is something that suits me, which is that I write explosively, but I write I make sure that I write very clean in the first draft. It's not disparate. I don't leave crumbs lying around. I keep everything very clean, very tight, and I treat the first draft as the good to go draft. In my mind, I'm always thinking, when I finish writing this, I should be able to send it to my publisher without having to look at it again. So I'm polishing and cleaning as I go. I'm tightening up stuff as I go. So there's also an element of laziness in this and a lack of time because once I finish writing, I want to just like send it and not have anything more to do with it and let the publisher do their work. But obviously it's my baby, it's my writing, so I can't just throw it out like that. So I make sure that what I'm doing as I progress through the writing is to be happy with everything I've written as I go, to sort of negate the need to go back and revise everything at the end. So usually by the end of it, that's the reason why it takes a whole day to finish writing a chapter. But at the end of it, I'm usually happy with what I've written. And sometimes just to test it, I will read everything once again, not with the intention to change anything, but just to see if I'm right. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, I don't change anything. At that point, I just send it out. So drafts are like, the draft business is a scary thing to me, because once it's out of my hands, it goes to the publisher. Then there are other draft issues. Then there are the first edit, the second edit, the line edit, the copy edit, all kinds of other edits. But at least there, I'm not in control. It's they who are making suggested changes, and then I decide whether I accept those changes or not. But from my end, it's one draft that goes.
So if I can use your own register, you don't spray bullets, you just take a headshot and you're done, right?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. So what would you say that you improved in India's Most Fearless Part Volume 2? Because by then you had the weight of experience of 2 books by then, right? Because I saw somewhere in one of your interviews you mentioned that writing has been the most difficult thing that I've had to do. You stressed that so many times. So what improved then in Shiv as a writer from in the 3rd book, given that you've already finished 2 books by then?
Siddharth, it's true. It's true. Writing is not easy, and I don't think it becomes easier if someone tells you it's easy, and that if you read more, you will write better and stuff. All those are obvious things, but writing is energy intensive. You're using energy from all places. It's like and I know for a fact that this is something that's not unique to me. Everybody feels this way. Writing is not easy. It's a difficult process, but once it starts and once you get that rhythm, then it becomes a really rewarding process. But it has become easier because once you have a couple of books behind you, then the nuts and bolts of the writing process are there. You know what narrative you want to use. The tools which I described, which are using visual elements, is there with you. So the kind of the tools you need to craft your story are there in front of you. It's just a question of finding the discipline and the time to sit down and use them and implement them to write your next book. But even for all that, it remains the most difficult thing. It's something that I still find extremely challenging, and something that I try to overcome a great deal. I can also tell you that the the weight of once you're a published author, and if you're lucky enough to have bestsellers on your shoulders, then the pressure of your readers is a wonderfully motivating force. It's a beautiful force because the publisher is one thing. Of course, there is a publisher who's like sort of getting after you to write your next book, but there can be nothing more rewarding than your audience. And I'm not saying you need to be a best-selling author for this. If you write something beautiful online and it's very popular on social media, it's the same kind of thing. People will want to read more of you or watch more of you. So which is why I circling back to what I said initially, use your online platforms to get yourself out there, to brand yourself, to put your personality out there, because people will tell you what they think of you, and that's the most amazing feedback you can possibly get. So every day Rahul and I are flooded, and I mean flooded, Siddharth, on whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or wherever else, by people saying, when is IMF 3 out? When is IMF 3 out? We're searching. You said August, now you're saying September, now you're saying December, now you're saying next year. What the hell? So it's that is it's kind of intimidating. It's a little scary because the gratification and pleasure of lakhs of others is literally in your hands. But it's a great motivating force as well.
Okay, now I'd like to move to the second half of the process, the life of the author. Okay, so till now we spoke about the writing process. Now I'd like to just take a peek into the life of the author. So how do you maintain your mental health amidst the trauma and chaos that you witness and experience while on the field? And is writing one of the outlets for reliving and revealing the scenes of terror?
Oh, it definitely is. It definitely is. Like I said, writing is cathartic. And Siddharth, I've been lucky enough to be part of an organization in India today which has always encouraged television journalists to write opinion pieces, write long form written pieces about what they've seen in the field. But you're absolutely right. Many of the things you report on are leave a great deal of trauma. And it's not just defense. Journalists across fields, witness traumatic things, whether they're covering crime, whether they're covering, scandals. All of these things do take a toll on journalists mentally. Speaking of my own experience, I have seen terrible, terrible things, really terrible things in my time as a journalist. I've covered conflict in Kashmir, in the Northeast, in Sri Lanka, most notably in Libya, where I was covering a full scale combat in Libya. So the things you see there are literally terrible. We went weeks and weeks where we were witnessing carnage literally every hour. So those things are extremely traumatic. They have a great impact on you. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. Among the many other things one could possibly take recourse to steady mental health, and I'd like to use this opportunity to tell people, don't ignore mental health. It's not a stigmatic thing. It's something that's very real. If people need help mentally, they should get it. uh, the world has completely changed now. There are no people out there to judge you. I mean, there are people, but we should ignore them. Mental health is a real issue, and especially post the pandemic with isolation and what have you. But yeah, at the time when I was reporting all these traumatic things, mental health was like this kind of faraway castle. So it was like, I've got other things to do right now than worry about my mental health. But who knows the kind of impact these things are happening on you mentally, subconsciously, and otherwise. So I believe that sitting down and just writing long, and during Libya especially, where we were literally sleeping amidst corpses. Uh, I remember sitting on my laptop over there and writing these 7,000-8,000 word blogs. It was on LifeFist that I wrote a blog in 2011, describing each night that I was spending over there. And those blogs are still there, and I still see people sharing some of them on Twitter, etc. About being in a hotel that was being bombed, and all those things. So I don't know if it helped me, but I'm guessing maybe it did. Maybe I just don't know it, because writing is a kind of expunging process. It's getting it out there. It's like having a good cry. I was with like, for example, in Libya, when there was me, my colleague Gaurav, and there were a couple of European journalists. There was this one guy from Europe who every night, Siddharth, he'd just step out of the building where we were staying, the bunkers, and he would just sit in a corner and cry for like half an hour. Just cry. I mean, I'm talking about like cry like a child, like sob, and then he'd be fine. And initially I was like, what the hell is this guy doing? And I'd ask him, like, what are you doing, man? And he'd say, I just need to cry every day to get this out of my system. And we used to kind of make fun of him initially, but then I realized, oh my God, he really needs to cry. So maybe that's how he managed his own mental health and his trauma. And me and my colleagues, we, sort of laughed at it initially, but then I found myself writing about it every day. So that maybe that was my way of managing it. So absolutely, writing is cathartic. It allows you to express, put it out there, manage it, understand it, rationalize, alleviate guilt. All those things are there in writing.
Independent writing versus co-authoring. So how do you manage the balance?
Oh, independent writing is great. It allows you full control in that sense. But I love cooperative writing. It's something that Rahul and I do very well. Rahul and I, first of all, are very old friends. We've worked together as defense journalists for a long time, so that fraternal chemistry is there. So there's no issue in terms of collaborating with each other. But the way we write a book like India's Most Fearless, Siddharth, is because they're all unconnected chapters. We split work, and we each do a handful of chapters each, and then we kind of exchange those chapters and we read them. And I do the work of adding stylistic cohesion so that the writing is all in a similar style and it doesn't look like there are two separate styles. Though we're now dabbling with the possibility of having those two styles. Why not? Why does it all need to be in one particular style? So, like I said, we're looking at some narrative changes and a few things to excite our readers a little bit. So we might have two distinct writing styles this time. It's a bit of a risk. Our publisher is not very happy with that, but let's see how that goes.
So for a cinema star, it's the box office collections, and for a musician, it's the applause after the performance. For a sportsman, it's lifting the trophy. What is it for the author?
It's the audience. It's feedback. It's the things that we hear every single day. It's the amazing heartfelt comments. We Siddharth, even now, India's Most Fearless came out in September 2017. Even now, every day there are at least 25 to 30 pictures we get sent on social media, Instagram, Twitter, wherever, Facebook, of people holding copies of our book or giving a copy of our book to their kid. Some of the most rewarding comments that we've had are that where people say, I don't read books, but I've started reading books because of India's Most Fearless, or people who said that, I've just finished class 11 and I've read India's Most Fearless and now I want to join the military. And now that's a bit of a slippery slope, because we never wrote the books to encourage people to join the military. That wasn't the point at all. These are not recruitment books by any stretch of imagination, because in many ways these books are, like someone has commented, these books should actually in some ways make you rethink wanting to join the military, because such terrible or terrifying things actually happen there. But there is this amazing thread of pride and honor in many of these stories, and that appears to have inspired huge numbers of people to say that I really want to think about a career in the military. So I thought about it, and I thought, why should I judge people for the way they react to my books? I think it's beautiful if they want to join the military after reading my books. That's a telling comment. That's a huge compliment to our work, even though that was not our intention. But I think people who say, I've given your books to schools, or given your books to to kids who are joining the military, or whatever it is, or I've started reading because of your books, is the most rewarding thing to hear. There can be nothing more rewarding. Book sales, royalties, all that is lovely. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and act aloof about those things. Those are all beautiful things. If your book is on a top 10 list, it's very, very gratifying, Siddharth. And of course, those are all indices, right, to show the success of your book. What else are those but to show that audiences are loving your work? But there's nothing like hearing from people saying, we love your book and your book has changed our life, and that's the way it is.
So what review did the director of Orient Black Swan give your books thus far? There's an aside here for the audience. The person that I'm referring to here would be Shiv's mother, and the best critic that one can have is your own family, isn't it? So what was the review that she gave your books? Apart from, of course, fault with your narrative techniques that are predictable.
Yeah, well, nothing but positive feedback. I constantly ask, tell my family, my mother, to if there's anything that you think I should do differently, please do tell me. But so far, she's been nothing but full of praise for the stories. I've seen her. I've seen my mother weep reading some of the stories sometimes, which is a common reaction I've seen when people read some of these stories. But she's been extremely supportive, and she has, more than criticism, she's full of questions about the families, about the way in which we went about these things. So she's full of curiosity, and so we have many my parents, we've had many conversations about the writing of the book, and in fact, they've asked many of the questions that you've asked in this interaction, Siddharth. So, yeah, thankfully, no criticism so far, but I would welcome it if it came.
Now, when we let out the information to all the students, to our students here, that you were going to be speaking to us today, I had solicited questions from them as well, because some of them have definitely read, because we have your books in our libraries. So quite a few students wrote to me, and those were some of the questions that I've incorporated. Now, since you said the families of the soldiers, this is another question that came in, and I hope I have the liberty to ask you that question. Do the soldiers or their families benefit monetarily from having their stories told?
In many ways, they do, Siddharth, because in uh, apart from the army taking care of these families in a very big way, uh, they gain monetarily in indirect way because as a result of our books, I can give you an example of a large number of foundations and NGOs that actually stepped forward to honor all of the families in India's most fearless, to take care of the education of the children, to provide them with the large, sort of monetary gifts, as well as certain facilities and jobs for the family for certain family members. This is in addition to what the army already does. The one thing I wanted to definitely say is that the army really the army and the military in general takes very good care of these families. So sometimes there is a narrative that is put out there that these families get ignored once things like this happen, but the army, the military are a very cohesive unit. The unit keeps in touch with these families, that they get visits, apart from all of the compensation, the wartime compensation and things like that. There's a great deal of human connect between the army, the unit, and the families. So, and as far as India's most fearless is concerned, we keep in touch with these families. We help them wherever we can. Very shortly after the third book is published, we will be beginning an India tour where we're going to be visiting all of the families from the first two books and the third book to weave together a kind of India's most fearless foundation as well, to get things on track and in a more organized way start some educational funding for the children of armed forces families. So all of those things are in the works right now.
Shiv, we're almost at the end of our session. So I had quite a few rapid fire questions for you, but I'll just shoot two at you. Abhinandan, would he make a chapter or a book?
Oh boy, book.
All right. What do you truly love doing? Fact or fiction?
Fact.
That is fact. All right. Okay. Donald Murray says, a piece of writing is never finished. It is delivered to a deadline, torn out of the typewriter on demand. If only there were a couple more days, he says. Similarly, I get the feeling this interview isn't over. If only I had a bit more time, I would love to continue this scintillating conversation with you. It has been a real pleasure having you with us. Thank you for taking time off from your schedule to make this happen. I'm sure the budding writers from our literature students, amongst our literature students and the audience, as well as our media students, would have definitely learned a thing or two.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Shivarur. It was fascinating to know that your career as a journalist has contributed immensely to your expertise as an author. Indeed, we have a lot to learn from your experiences that highlight ethical creativity. We thoroughly enjoyed a dive into your writing process, which will help us to unravel the intricacies of storytelling. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. The next session is with and on the works of Miss Usha K.R., a novelist, fiction writer, and an editor. Yes, we all are eagerly waiting for a session with Miss Usha, but before we listen to the author herself, let us first get acquainted with her works. So, we have with us now Miss Niti Gopalakrishnan of MA English final year and Miss Yukti Bharatwaj from the first year of MA English, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, Anantapur campus, who will be making a presentation on the topic Evolving urban spaces and devolving human spaces. Usha KR's Monkey Man. Over to Miss Smriti and Miss Yukti.
The city, or more properly the urban, has had a fugitive existence in the political, cultural, and sociological imaginations of modern India. Only recently, and somewhat fitfully, have these imaginations been transformed to admit a consideration of the city as a legitimate object of attention, investigation, and research, and as a site that recasts the meaning of citizenship, democracy, and indeed modernity in contemporary India. Om Sri Sai Ram. Our humble pranams at the divine lotus feet of Bhagwan Baba. A warm welcome to all the dignitaries and literary enthusiasts present today. Today, we attempt to see how Usha Kiar's Monkey Man reflects the way urbanization has changed the city of Bengaluru and affected its people. The novel reflects the urbanized aspect of human life, transformed human relationships, and debased human values. The recipient of 2007 Vodafone Crossword Award for Fiction and 2010 Man Asian Literary Prize, Usha K.R. has authored four novels, namely Sojourn, The Chosen, A Girl and a River, and Monkey Man. She began writing in She began writing in short fiction and made her mark amongst the novelists of today, dealing with the themes that explore human nature in myriad ways. Even the novel, which is the subject of our discussion today, traces different events in the lives of its characters that have impacted them in profound ways throughout the Monkey Man journey. All the four characters have accidental experience with the creature that even leads them to Bali Brahm's radio station to tell them what they saw. Yet another important aspect of this novel is the technological transformation of the city, which plays a very significant role in shaping the lives and perceptions of people. The truth behind the monkey man remains an open mystery as the novel ends where the reader's imagination and curiosity begins. In this section of our presentation, the modernized aspect of the life of the characters will be chalked out to examine the extent up to which urbanization has been welcomed or resented by the characters. Now, all of us who have read this novel would agree that the technological advancements have positively impacted the life and career of the characters. The very basic impact we see is in the terms of urbanized dwellings and professions. The entire novel is actually set up in Amanguri Street, which owes its name to a goddess. Once upon a time, this place was filled with mud forts and old shops, which have now been replaced by fast food restaurants and internet cafes, which only reflects the way urbanization has changed its outlook. And it is not just the place that is affected, but it also brings about a change in the very important thing of a life, that is education. Now, this is something which some of the listeners will associate more with. They have seen how modernization brings about a revolution in educational facilities. In the novel, we see Jairam, who is a character who is fascinated a lot by urbanization. He decides to build a new school building having all the modern equipments like computers, etc. Now, moving ahead to point number three on the screen, we see that all the technological advancements have opened up a new possibility to individuals regarding what profession they want to choose. And it has also transformed people into more open minded beings. We have the best examples in the form of Bali Brahms, who drops out of the college and he follows his passion of becoming a radio jockey. And yet another character we have is Pushpa Rani, who starts working in a call center, doing away with her government job. This change of profession is actually backed up by a shift towards urbanized ideologies. Now, some of us may think that Bali Brahm's decision to become an RJ must be because he lagged behind in academics. But in fact, he was someone who wanted to do what he was interested in, and he didn't want it to be bogged down by the pressures of his parents or peers. Apart from this, we have someone like Jairam, who is very strongly opinioned against capitalism in America. But as the story gains momentum, we get to see how modernization changes his attitude towards people and towards situation in very different ways. It is Jairam who moves to US along with his wife Geeta, and upon coming back, he is the one who comes up with the idea to revolutionize and modernize the national trust institutions, and he's the one who even scorns his friend Murthy for having these kind of old school attitudes. So these ideological changes, they actually are very helpful in society for journal. While reading the book, what I felt was that the good ideology of one person can impact everybody around him in a very good way. The best example for this is seen in the form of Professor SVK, who is the epitome of a perfect teacher. He is a kind of teacher who promotes discussion and debates. He is someone who invites students' opinions, and even he impacts their lives in such a way that Murthy, who is one of his students, he comes up with this film club initiative as one of the teaching methods following the footsteps of his teacher. Next, we shall look into urbanization in terms of customs and costumes. If we talk about wearing a formal Western attire to workplace in present day scenario, it will sound completely normal. But in the novel, which is set up in around 2010, we find some of the characters that are struggling with these upcoming fashion trends. So we have this character named Neela. Neela is someone who is not like appreciable in the way she deals with her co-workers and the people around her, and thus she even mocks at Alka for being very much preoccupied with self-grooming. And Alka is someone who has adapted herself to this new way, to this urbanized way of dressing up. Even Jairam's wife Geeta and her uh, way of attire, that is her choice of attire, that is jeans, trousers, and t-shirts, it makes Murthy very glad about his own wife's choice of dressing that has never changed from sari. Now, shifting our attention from choice of costumes to rejecting unnecessary customs, we see in the novel one of the most fascinating aspects of cultural growth during those times. We have Neela Mary's parents who had an intercaste marriage, which is actually suggestive that how people in the city are receptive towards mingling with each other, about a mingling culture, and they also are breaking away from all the caste related issues. It is actually remarkable that the story not only talks about how we are fascinated by the world, but it also talks about how the admiration of our culture and our tradition by an outsider affects us. We have Dr. Larson, who is a foreigner, and she is someone who holds a very strong interest in exploring Indian religion, and she is someone who goes to temple regularly. So till now, we saw how different characters accepted urbanization and how it affected their life positively. Now we shall look into the other half of it. Over to you, Smriti sister.
Insights into how technology can impact us in a positive way. I once came across this quote by Albert Einstein who said, "It has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity." I think, I think this quote is very apt here where we discuss the devolving human species in the novel. We saw how Monkey Man reflects the positive impact that technology can have on our lives. At the same time, the very same novel reveals the ill effects of urbanization when we look at the emotional and social spectrum of human life. Beginning with troubled human relationships that can be analyzed in the novel. I would like to first look at Bali Brahm, our radio jockey. As Yukti mentioned earlier, he decides to drop out of college, and this upsets his parents, of course. Which of our parents would be happy to know that their son is dropping out of college in the final year of engineering course, and not because he was doing poorly, but because he did not have an interest or his heart in what he was doing. And what surprised me the most was that even after so many years since that incident, he does not take an initiative to sort out problems with his father. And I don't know how many of you will agree with me, but I feel that it reflects how people have now begun to be less concerned with human relationships and how they do not consider what their family wants for them and place their own happiness first. Another strange relationship that can be analyzed in the novel is Murthy and Lily's marriage. It is strange because it throws light on how someone's likes and dislikes can lead to wide gaps in the relationship that they share with people. We see that Murthy mentions in the novel that he never took advice or suggestions from his wife regarding his work, as he felt that it should not be matters that should concern her. Lily also never interferes with his professional life. But when he declines the offer to go to Canada for taking up research studies, she seems very upset. Another odd element of their marital relationship is the eternal presence of her cousins Balu and Sukhi. And oddly, Murthy is never frustrated and disturbed by their presence in his private space that he shares with his wife. I feel that there is a sort of disconnectedness between both Murthy and Lily, as they do not wish to involve in each other's lives any more than they already have. And though we cannot blame either of them, I feel that one reason could be Murthy's own views on luxury and comfortable living and technologically enabled lifestyle that he obviously is seen to resent and Lily visibly favors. Another intriguing character of the novel is Neela Mary, who has a very sad episode in her workplace wherein she is betrayed by one of her office colleagues, Prithvi Kumar. And after this devastating episode, she takes refuge in none other than Bali Brahm, our radio jockey. And she sort of develops a very emotional relationship with Bali Brahm. And I felt this was disturbing because her feelings are not reciprocated by Balaji. She appears overly attached to him as he is her only solace in a world that has not treated her well enough. I feel that this can be surely related to the way today social media platforms are giving us an opportunity to develop emotional relationships and meet people whom we have never really met in person. But can also be dangerous because it can lead to high emotional expectations that might not be reciprocated by the other person. Another troubled relationship that can be analyzed in the novel is the beautiful friendship that is shared between Jairam, Murthy, and Geeta during the beginning of their college days. We see that their friendship begins to fade away when Jairam starts getting involved in political and theatre activities and is not seen much around. Especially between Jairam and Murthy, there is a huge gap that is created because Murthy is, as we know, a very old school type of person, and Jairam is someone who does not resist change and builds a very modern lifestyle for himself. Another instance where we can see that today's generation is not concerned about family and is very busy with professional lives is the instance where SPK, the professor from National Trust College, is ill, and Geeta remarks to Murthy that his sons are useless because Jairam is the one who is running around doing all the arrangements for booking the ambulance and things. It shows how children today find no time to take care of their parents and are busy with professional and social lives. To the next part of this discussion, we're going to see how there is a struggle with technological luxuries in the that the characters have in the novel. And in this section, I'll be focusing on Murthy because he's someone who despises any use of technology in his life, and it explains probably why he does not have children despite the rising technological advancements in the field of gynecology. This shows how the public are ignorant and lack awareness about the way things can change and enhance their lives when technology is used. Both Lily and Murthy seem to have accepted their fate and do not complain about this. Murthy does not also use a cell phone, though he knows and is aware of the way it can help him communicate with his wife when he's away from home and his students and colleagues. He sort of feels compelled to stick to his anti-tech values. Um, he also feels a sort of inferiority complex when he compares his scooter with other people's cars or bikes. And yet he does not attempt to upgrade his lifestyle in any way that aligns with the growing modernity around him. Also, when Jairam proposes the new college building with modern technological facilities, Murthy is at the forefront standing against it. He does not support the way the college is being transported to keep up with the changing times. Another important aspect that is developed throughout the plot of the novel is the debased human values that is a result of modernization and urbanization. Neela Mary is not a character who exhibits professional ethics in her work. She withholds the check to be given to Alka and Prithvi Kumar's appointment letter for selfish reasons. She's also seen indulging in personal gossip with Prithvi Kumar, commenting on the way her other colleagues are dressing to office. Her colleagues too are seen commenting about her in her absence, and Prithvi Kumar also adds his own remarks about her. None of them seem to hold any real liking for one another. This work culture reflects the state of professional ethics followed in most of the work environments of modern India. There is a lack of respect for another's private life and choices, such as what to wear, and it is a primary feature of workplace cultures today. Another instance where the degradation of human values is reflected is the way Bali Brahm is treated by the professors of the National Trust College. They have a very strange attitude towards him. Some of them are obvious admirers and yet fear to show their admiration and adoration because of others' judgments. And some others try to challenge his decision to become a radio jockey and ask him not to share ideas of dropping out of college with his students. Treating a guest who has agreed to interact with them upon request in such a way shows how the teachers despise the media and its popularity, and also how they have a lack of respect for another's choice in work. As mentioned earlier, Bali Brahm does not respond to Nelly and Pushpa Rani with true affection, and he might be justified in doing it as they are just one among the many fans that he has in the city. And he ignores many messages from his fans who wish to visit his studio and meet him in person. I feel that it shows how human emotions and feelings are taken for granted most often by us. Jairam also showcases a very manipulative attitude when he wins the prize for his film review and does not even acknowledge that the ideas and opinions that he talks about there were not even his. When confronted by Murthy about this, he tactfully manipulates the situation, remarking how opinions can ever be owned by any one person in a discussion. This shows how there is a lack of respect and integrity in him, wanting success and fame at any cost, even if one's ethics and values are compromised. Murthy and Jairam also are seen taking to smoking habits that reveal how modern man is having a disregard for his health and also the health of others around him. The young girls at the club that Murthy visits also humiliate him, whereas he treats them as a friend. This demonstrates the modern concept of friendliness, which is seen as a license to disrespect someone while they are expected to act cool about it. The last section of this discussion would be the different aspects and perspectives through which the characters view the strange creature. No one is sure as to what they saw. Their remarks and judgments vary according to their own thoughts and inner fears and suspicions. Pushpa Rani and Sukhya Ram have a very orthodox approach to the creature and claims it to be a bad omen and a Rakshasa, whereas Neela describes it as a giant vampire bat. And this, I feel, shows a way of alienating and stereotyping something that is not adhering to the societal standards of appearance and beauty. And Moti has very different has a very different outlook on the monkey man encounter. He feels that it is just one of Balu's plans, and we see that his inner suspicions about Balu resurface here. All these descriptions of these characters, in a way, bring to light their own inner fears and suspicions. And their fears that they hold in their subconscious mind can be a parallel to the sudden upsurge of technology and urbanization and human struggles to cope with these changes. As I said earlier, there is a tendency in the characters to view anything that is unfavorable to their taste as foreign, as bestial, as wild. And in the same light of alienation and stereotypical attitudes, I feel that this encounter with the monkey man can also vividly symbolize the colonizing power of British India. The way the Britishers saw Indians as barbarians and put in efforts to tame us and civilize our culture can be equated to the way Monkey Man is treated by the other characters as a wild creature. On a concluding note, what we infer from our study of the novel is that the only solution to cope with this new world lies in the art of balance. It is a matter of individual choice to use one's intellect in deciding what factors can help us grow and what can make us a mere puppet in technology's hands. I think it would be apt to quote John Naisbitt, a public speaker in future studies, who writes in his book Megatrends that we must learn to balance the material wonders of technology with the spiritual demands of our human race. And we hope that all of us master the art of perfect balance. And we look forward to listening to Usha KR in her interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smriti and Ms. Yukti. Your insightful presentation has highlighted your research rigor and mature interpretation on the novel Monkey Man. With that illuminating background, we now look forward to listening to the author herself. It is indeed a great opportunity to introduce Ms. Usha KR. Ms. Usha has authored 5 novels: Sojourn, The Chosen, A Girl and a River, Monkey Man, and Boys from Good Families. Her novels have been listed for several awards, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Man Asia, and the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. Her novel, A Girl and a River, won the Vodafone Crossword Award for Fiction, and Monkey Man was shortlisted for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. Her essays and short stories have been featured in magazines, newspapers, collections, and anthologies, including the Katha Prize Stories. Her short story, Sepia Tones, won the Katha Award for Creative Writing back in 1995. She occasionally reviews books for the Deccan Herald and is the managing editor of IIMP Management Review, Bangalore. Ms. Usha K.R. was a writer in residence at the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa, United States during the fall of 2011. In conversation with Ms. Usha K.R. is Dr. Rani P.L., Associate Professor and Head, Department of Languages and Literature. Madam is a physics graduate from Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning who turned to literature for her postgraduate degree, which she completed in 1995. In 1996, Madam joined the Department of English Language and Literature at SSSIHL as a faculty member. Dr. Rani received her doctoral degree in 2011 from Sri Krishnadevaraya University, Anantapur. Besides being a passionate academician who participated in many seminars, workshops, and conferences, she is also an eloquent speaker, writer, and editor, and not to forget, an incredible teacher. Her research interests lie in post colonial literature, media linguistics, literature and pop culture, eco criticism, and ELT. Madam is a member of several professional and academic bodies and is the coordinator of IQAC of SSSIHL. My pleasure to invite you both for a dialogue this morning, Ms. Usha K.R. and Dr. Rani P.L.
Welcome to this session, which is a conversation with a Bengaluru-based novelist, Usha K.R. Our students have just talked to us about Usha K.R. and her works. It's now my pleasure to invite Madam Usha K.R. to be in a conversation with me so that the conversation benefits our large audience here. We live in a world full of distractions, full of chatter, noise, text messages, tweets, and whatnot. And writing, I conservatively believe, is an activity that needs silence, solitude, discipline, and clarity of thought. The very purpose of this webinar, Lit Treat Edition 2, is to find out, to explore how in this world of authorpreneurship, where authors are also battling to sell their books, how do people actually stand a chance to make the world hear what they write? We hear writing is the best way to talk without being interrupted. So, ma'am, let's get straight into our conversation. How did you take to writing, or why did you take to writing?
I'll answer your question in a minute, Dr. Rani. Before that, I want to thank you. I want to thank the Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning for inviting me to participate in this year's webinar, this year's edition of Lit Treat. And it's very well named, I must say, because literature is a treat if you, when you get down to it, when you attend to it silently. You just spoke about the noise in the world, but if you give yourself time with literature, it is a treat indeed. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar organized by the English department. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here and to have my work discussed here among, and my views expressed here amidst all the research scholars, the students, the dignitaries, and the community that is participating. Thank you, Dr. Rani, for inviting me. To come to the question, how and why did you take to writing? That's a very obvious question to address to a writer. You know, why do you write? How did you take to it? But the thing is, it is also one of the most, the questions where the answers are very elusive. I don't think any writer would be able to give a cogent and a direct answer to this question. why did you start writing, or how did you get to it? So one must approach it tangentially. Uh, why do writers write fiction? Now, writers, they are born, they come into this world, they grow up, they have myriad experiences, just like everybody else. You know, observing experiences, it's like a capillary action. And you read, you grow older, and just like everybody else, your subjective experiences give way to an objective worldview. Your horizons grow wider, and you realize that the world comprises different people, people who are not necessarily like you. And there are other people, other families, other cities, other countries. So it is, as the world impinges on your senses directly and indirectly, what you come to realize is that the world consists of differences. Likenesses, yes, but also differences. And writing fiction, for me, is an act of making sense of the world, of all these experiences that impinge upon you in one way or the other. And it is also, uh, an exploration of what it means to be human, the human condition. That to me is why I write fiction and why I came to writing fiction. Now,
That's nice.
Yes.
Yeah, please. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
In a country like India, there is so much variety all around you. There is, there is so much social variety, the complexity, the color, the noise, the polyphony, the cacophony, even, and then the absurdity. This is what a combination of this is what drew me to writing fiction, and also the fact that I read a lot. So for me, it was to make sense of this, the place I lived in, and to come to grips with it, to explore it, and come to terms with it. And there is another aspect that I want, another impulse that I want to talk about. Even as you are bombarded by, there is this sensory overload that is bombarding you. It again, writers, you realize that you are living moment to moment. Your life is in a state of flux. There is no completeness. It is an ongoing thing. And at the same time, you want to create a world where you give completeness, where you are looking for things to be resolved, for the loop to be closed. Let me quote Tennessee Williams, the American playwright here. He said, "Why did I write? Because I found life unsatisfactory." So there is this sense of restlessness, of wanting to follow the trail of life and uh, have some kind of control, bring it to a close, and close the loops, even as you live in a state of flux and in a state of continuity. So if I were to sum it up, I would say that writing to me is the personal expression of a subjective truth, a way of seeing and comprehending the world. And the style that any writer uses would be her mode of expression.
Right, that's very nice. So, as you said, history records events with dates and years, maybe. The media records for us details, maybe a little more in detail because it's a pre-draft to history, they say. But it's only literature, I dare say, and I'm sure you will agree with me, which captures the human predicament, which captures the human emotion, which captures the human joys and sorrows, the trauma and the suffering, and everything that comes with life. So I think the importance of literature in our society is, or it should be accorded because of what it captures, what other fields of study probably is unable to capture. That is the importance that literature carries. So thank you, ma'am. We live in a world that believes in being functional, being purposeful, being practical. So all scientific researches in which we invest crores are considered to be of great use to the society. In contrast, creative writing, unfortunately, is not treated as a fruitful occupation. The notion that exists, the general notion that exists, is that creative writing is not a purposeful pursuit of or an activity that that has any purpose in it. So my next question to you is, what do you think is the use or the purpose of any creative writing at all? Because if there are some students who are thinking of taking up creative writing, not for becoming a bestseller author or not for the commerce behind it, but for being a creative writer, art for art's sake, what is
Right.
your advice on that?
Um, I mean, that's an interesting question now. Of what use is creative writing? All the more now when the real world itself is so cracked up, and it seems so interesting, and our ways of accessing the world now are infinitely more. You have the internet, and through email, through the actual beaming of events on the camera, you can see things even as they are happening. So in such a situation, in such a milieu, what is the use of a writer shutting himself or herself up, and then scribbling away, pen on paper or fingers on keyboard, recording what you think, your subjective responses. So fair enough. What is the use? I think it was Naipaul who said, what is the use of these tales of made up people, and these made up tales of made up people? But if we just think a little, we are born with the faculty of the imagination, and it comes into play right in the beginning as soon as you hear the words, once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a man who lived in a shoe. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who fell in love with a mouse. Now, as a child, you have no difficulty coming to terms or even accommodating these fantastic statements. We are born with the facility to suspend disbelief, not to take things so literally. So we have always used the real world as a takeoff point. You want to leap off into the fantastic, into stories, into fairy tales, even into tales of horror from the real world. So storytelling is an essential part of the human makeup. I'm sure the psychologists will kind of give you more information on the purpose that stories serve. So when you are embarking on a novel or a story as a writer and as a reader, you may, as a writer, you may have the rough contours of your story and your novel in mind. But writing, as is reading, is a journey, and it is a process of self-discovery, of learning more about yourself. And when you set off on this journey to know more about yourself, I believe that you become a more empathetic person. You become more empathetic towards your fellow human beings. In getting to know yourself, you develop empathy for others, and you come to terms with their imperfection. I want to quote the author George Eliot here. George Eliot says, "Art is the nearest thing to life. It is a mode of amplifying experience and extending our contact to our fellow men beyond the bounds of our personal lot." So it is a way of sharing, of being empathetic, of establishing your human connection with the next person, which is what our scriptures, all our scriptures talk about. But of course, that is a conversation for another maybe another lit treat. To quote something on the lighter side, I'd like to quote Mark Twain, the American writer, who summed up what growing up and understanding the world means in this when he says, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant that I could scarcely stand having him around. But by the time I grew up and I became 21 years old, I was amazed at how much the old man had learned." So that is his way of coming to terms with growing up and understanding yourself and others. You're more at ease with yourself. Here, I mean, we have students of literature here. I want to draw your attention to a phrase used by the critic James Wood. He said that good writing, good fiction, either as a writer or as a reader, helps you in serious noticing. There is an essay called Serious Noticing by James Wood, which your students might like to read, may find interesting. And he says that good fiction helps us become better noticers of the world and become better readers of the world and of people. He classifies three different kinds of noticing. He calls it aesthetic noticing, human noticing, and metaphysical noticing. But to sum up what he says, first of all, good fiction, observant fiction with details, and either as a writer or a reader, you become more aware of the world. Your senses open up. You notice blue sky, the smell of the earth after the rain. You can taste the earth and or rather the air. It could be petrol fumes or it could be the newly washed air after a rain. But you become more alert and you become more sensitive to the world around you. And through literature, it is these sensations, you can communicate it to others through imagery and metaphor. So through language, it can enrich your experience, your enjoyment of the world. Then again, literature helps you to become self-reflective. You also reflect upon your own experiences and the complexity of being a human being. The difference between your private self and your public self. You get an opportunity to examine that, and that brings again the complexity of human nature alive. You begin to understand that there are so many dimensions to being human and to interacting with each other. And finally, fiction helps you to raise the deepest questions about our existence. When you create a world, you populate them with characters, you give them motives, you give them ideas, you make them act in certain ways. That is and you provide them with predicaments. But that is an opportunity to reflect upon and to explore these questions. Why? What happens? What is the meaning of life? And the other questions that you may not be able to address so openly, you may not be able to take head on. Chekhov, the Russian playwright, he said that a writer's job is not to provide answers, but to ask the right questions. And I think that is what fiction does, creative writing does.
Right. Ma'am, when you were mentioning Mark Twain, I was reminded of another interesting line from him, which goes so much with what you're explaining. So he said somewhere, I hope I'm remembering it right, he said, I never allowed my schooling to interfere with my education.
Yes, right.
So we live in a world where we think if you have degrees and qualifications from the universities, we are well equipped. But like you just mentioned, it's all about observing the life around you. It's a lot about exploring what might not be in textbooks that actually contributes to our understanding of life. And a lot of that is subtle and unsaid maybe, except for in literature, if I may say.
Yes.
So this brings me, So this brings me to the next point that I wanted to talk to you about. Probably it was with Thomas Hardy that I heard of the regional novels, because he placed all his novels in the setting of Wessex. And then maybe in the recent past, about 3-4 years ago, when a student was looking up some research topics, I discovered there's something called the whole genre of Mumbai novels. A lot of people right from Shantaram that we all know of, maybe right up to Jeet Tile's Narcopolis, maybe that's one of the latest, or maybe a lot from Rohinton Mystery, Fine Balance and others, which are set typically in the Mumbai metro or the slums. So when we come to your writing, we find that you have, I presume, consciously chosen the locale of Bengaluru. So your connect with Bengaluru and your reason to place your novels in the typical milieu of Bengaluru would be interesting to know.
Yes, thank you for this question. As I discussed this, the question of look, uh, you know, I hope to also talk about some other aspects of fiction and literature. Uh, you see, at a very every novelist or a novel or a story has to have a setting. So Bangalore is the setting of most of my work. It is like a peg on which I hang my hat. Now, as I said, at a very simple level, Bangalore is the city in which I was born, in which I have spent most of my life. So it is familiarity. But as we all know, for a novelist, familiarity is not enough. There has to be something more. As Nabokov said in his essay, Readers and Good Writers, the art of writing is a very futile business if it does not imply, first of all, the art of seeing the world as the potentiality of fiction. So the city of Bangalore suggests itself to me intuitively. It fires my imagination as a setting for my characters and my story. At the same time, objectively, I know that the city has a history and it has traversed along certain lines which make it an interesting place to set fiction. So I would say that Bangalore is, in a way, it is a crucible for my tales, for my characters, my themes, the events, the things that take place. They're all mixed and, heated to such a high point that at some time there is the blue flame of the imagination, which covers everything and allows for a story or a shareable experience to emerge. So it is the tension between the external circumstances, between what the city presents, the face of the city, and the lives of my characters, the tension between the two. I find that the setting of Bangalore allows for it, allows for my concerns to emerge. Now, if we step back a little, you will know as students of sociology and economics, you will know that Bangalore, the city of Bangalore or Bengaluru, it is a poster boy, or rather, it is a showcase for many of the changes that have swept across our country and even the world in the past few decades. There is a handy acronym for it, LPG. At one time, it used to be liquefied petroleum gas, but now, more popularly, you hear mention of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. And Bangalore almost was, these movements or these things, these developments. Bangalore was almost, it was almost as if a culture was being developed in a petri dish in a lab. The frenetic pace of growth, the changes that have taken place in this city is something that all Bangaloreans have witnessed. And this has set off the imagination of many writers. And my novel, Monkey Man, is set in 2000, in the new millennium. And I'll just take a minute, half a minute to tell you what it's about. There are four characters. One is a college lecturer, a secretary, an office boy, and a disc jockey, a radio jockey, who, in the gathering dusk, in the new millennium, they sight a strange, fantastic being on a street called Ammanagudi Street. And then the novel draws back to reflect on what they could have seen and how it is connected with their lives. So when I think of my characters, I think of them as, two of them are old economy characters. That is the teacher and the secretary. They are threatened by the new Bangalore, the changes that have come in. Whereas for the disc jockey and the office boy, the new changes bring in a lot of opportunities. Now, you know that at that time, there was a spate of newspaper reports about this strange beast being seen or in places all over India. which kind of attacked people and then ran away. And it wasn't completely solved. The mystery was not solved. Now, your economics textbooks, sociology textbooks, they may be able to give you, as you said, Dr. Rani, in the beginning, they may be able to give you factual accounts of the changes of LPG, the changes that have taken place with data, with statistics. But what does it mean for a novel, for a writer of fiction to tackle these themes? What could that creature be? Was it a figment of somebody's imagination, something that they just saw in the dusk, it was an optical illusion? Or was it some kind of embodiment of the fears of the people who are transfixed and unable to come to terms with a city that is changing so quickly and changing so fast? They are not able, their inner selves, their emotions are not able to keep track and keep pace with the changes that they see happening around them. So in that creature, I saw the framing device for my novel. And that framing device is what is required to transport or to transfigure our concerns, day-to-day concerns that you read in the newspapers, that you read in your textbooks, into fiction. So that is the blue light of the imagination that is required to lift these events and to make something else of it. I just want to quote Nabokov here. He speaks about something which is very relevant to this whole process of transfiguring, which is when fiction is born. I'm sure you all must be familiar with the Aesop's fable about the boy who cried wolf. So to just refresh our memory, you know that he's in one of Aesop's fables, there is this shepherd boy who takes his flock out of the village to the edge of a forest, and he has to graze them and take care of them the whole day. And possibly this boy is bored or lonely, so he just cries, wolf, wolf. And then the whole village comes running. And then he says, no, it's a joke. It's a false alarm. And then they go away. And of course, we know what happens. When a real wolf, an actual wolf comes and attacks his flock, and he cries out, wolf, wolf, the villagers say, oh, it is him and his old games. It's a false alarm. And they don't turn up. And the flock is eaten. And in some versions, even the boy comes to harm. So what Nabokov says is, literature was not born on the day when the boy crying wolf, wolf came running out of the valley with the wolf at his heels. Literature was born on the day when a boy crying wolf, wolf came out of the valley and there was no wolf behind him. The fact that his sheep were eaten or he himself was eaten, he says that is quite incidental. What is important is between the wolf in the tall grass and the wolf in the tall story, there is a shimmering go-between. That go-between, that prism, is the art of literature. So you require that some transfiguring element to lift or to transform these familiar experiences, what everybody else knows, into a story, into fiction.
Yes. So that's interesting because R.K. Narayan's Malgudi was all imaginary. And yes.
And still so real.
Yes. And we're talking about being familiar with the locale. So let's now talk about, we've decided to become writers and we find purpose in being creative writers. And then we have this locale and the setting that's kind of ready because we are familiar with that. We also have this idea or this concept because of unnatural events or natural events that we've observed very closely. And very painstakingly, you have sat down and in a very disciplined manner written your whole book. Now comes the more practical part of it. And strangely, you also mentioned Nabokov. So I'm just going to go recall a line from him where he says, my pencils outlast their erasers. So this, I'm sure, I'm leading you to think about what happens if you have a script that is ready with you. Until it is published, it's like a baby that's unborn. So you want it to see the light of day. So the writer, while so steeped in creative thinking and fancy imagination and whatever else, has to also think of some of these practicalities of how is my book going to see the light of day. So my question now is, what has been your publishing experience? You, I'm sure, took the traditional route of going to a publisher who saw the book. And so can you share a little bit about that with us, please?
Sure. And this is very relevant for writers today. And I hope in answering this question and some others, we'll be able to talk about it. So my first novel was published in 1998. And I had some short stories published before that. And since then, I've written 4 more novels. So I have 5 novels now. Now, at that time, in the in the 80s and even in the 90s, there was space for in the print media, in the supplements of newspapers, in magazines. They carried short stories. But now that space has shrunk. Definitely for writing in English, it has. Maybe there are these magazines and the festival specials that are there in the bhashas, in the other Indian languages. However, while the space in the traditional print medium has shrunk, new vistas have opened up, literally out of thin air. With the internet, now it is possible. There are myriad opportunities. People can create a little home of their own on the internet, a little space, and put out their work. It's not necessary that you need to put all your work out there. You can put out snippets, you can write blogs. There is the vlog, that is, you can post videos, and there are also different formats in which you can put out your work. There are e-zines and there are self-publishing opportunities. I know that Amazon encourages it, and there are a lot of others. You just have to go again to ubiquitous Google and say self-publishing platforms in India, and I'm sure you will come up with many opportunities where you can take your work forward. Now, when I first sent my manuscript across, I sent it across to the publisher and I communicated with the publisher's editor. But now I don't think that would be possible. If I were to start today, or even if I were to send a manuscript, if a new writer with his or her precious manuscript in hand were to send it over, an unsolicited manuscript would probably land up at the bottom of the slush pile that all publishers, editors have. So you would need to go through an agent, and agenting is there in place in India. And again, the internet would yield names of different agents who would take your work and see that it reaches a publisher. So this is, in brief, what publishing means today. So you could either self-publish, go forward, or you could create a little space on the internet and put out bits of your work and make sure that you garner enough attention so that you can go to a publisher and say, hey, look, so many people, these many people are interested in my work. I think I have something of interest to say to people, and there would be a response. It amounts to sales. You would find that there is a market for my kind of work.
Right. So yes, as you mentioned, with self-publishing and Kindle direct publishing and all that.
Yes, Kindle direct with Amazon. Yes,
yes. So all that has a lot of scope for writers today.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So this brings me to the actual act of writing itself, ma'am. So does writing come to you, or do you go to it? And to expand my question a little bit, let's presume, and maybe I'm taking my own example. Let's presume we're doing something else. Maybe we are traveling. Maybe we are in a place that's filled with noise and chatter, and you can suddenly feel alone and have a compulsion to write down something. Or I can set up a time and a place that I go to, sit down religiously and do my writing. So is it a habitual activity? How do you combine your inspiration with the habit of writing? You can be inspired suddenly with a nice thought that you want to capture at that moment, because lest we should lose it, if you go back to it later. So how do you actually carry out this whole task of writing itself, this pleasant task of writing itself?
Right. One tip, it's always good to carry a notebook, a little notebook, and then when ideas occur to you, you could jot them down. But coming down to, does writing go to you, or does writing come to you, or you go to writing? Here, I'd like to quote Thomas Edison, who discovered the light bulb, who said, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration."
Yes.
So, once you have that flutter of excitement, okay, I have an idea, I have these characters, I have this story, I know exactly how to put it, the structure has come to me. And you feel it in your bones, that the game is afoot again. Yes, I have what it takes to come out with a story, or to come out with an essay, or to come out with a novel. What do you do next? You have to create a disciplined routine to write. Even if you're traveling or whatever it is, there must be some time, even if it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, some time where you devote to the writing project, even if it means editing what you have done yesterday, or rewriting it, or as Nabokov, your eraser is put to more work than your pencil. So even then, the grunt work has to be done, whether it is reading, going to libraries, meeting people, your so-called research on the internet, it has to be done. See, because a writer cannot live in a bubble. So writing is often a solitary activity. It is a lonely activity, but it is not a rarefied or an exotic activity. Writers are not an exotic species of people whom you kind of put on a pedestal or you put into a gilded cage. And there is nothing romantic about a writer starving in a garret. You often hear it sounds very romantic. It sounds very romantic when you're young, but it just doesn't work. You have to sit down, and just as you do other things, you immerse yourself in the thick of life, and then afterwards you get down to work. Just as a carpenter would chip away at his block of wood, I'm sure just as Michelangelo chipped away at his block of marble, or a mason applies himself to work. Writers should develop that discipline in what they do. There is no other way out.
Okay, that's interesting. So when you write, I'm sure you said you have the structure in your mind, and you kind of come to put your thoughts on paper when you have some kind of an outline in your mind. So are there characters that are close to people you know, almost like who you are, or characters whom you create to reflect your thinking, and maybe more broadly, characters you create to voice your concerns? How do the characters get formed in your own mind?
First of all, Gustave Flaubert, the author of Madame Bovary, he said, "Madame Bovary, c'est moi. Madame Bovary, that's me." So your characters, in a way, are you and they aren't. I remember at a book release, Amitav Ghosh was asked this question: do you base your characters on real life? And he had a very interesting answer. He said, if the answer to that question is yes, I'll say no. So the thing is, the question you're asking is the writer a ventriloquist for his or her ideas? Or do characters end up as being mouthpieces for your concerns, for what you want to express? Now, the way things work, let me share how things work rather than, again, answer this question directly. Your work as your story or your novel is in essence your worldview, which is refracted through the prism of your mind and your imagination. And in presenting the world as you see it, you create a set of characters, you put them into situations, you trace the logic of their thoughts, you trace the logic of their actions, you see what the fallout is. So, in this friction, and in this movement, a whole world emerges. So, what you want to create is, writers want to reflect honestly upon the world. So, you want to create a complex picture that envisages all that you are trying to say in a unity. You want to create a multi-layered microcosm, an ecosystem, to spin a web where there are connections. And even if it is a flawed world, you want to present it as it is. So I don't think, in this being the case, I don't see writers wanting characters who are very much like them or to work them as the direct opposites. Writers don't want to be found out so easily. You don't want to yield your secrets so so easily, or you don't want people to figure this out. You want readers also to work and to it's like a maze. You want people to get in, to work around, and then feel the pleasure of coming across something and saying, yes, that's a new way of looking at it. Oh yes, this is a world that I identify it, I understand it, it makes sense to me, it excites me. So that is the answer that I have. Now, here again, I would like to bring in Keats, Dr. Rani, the poet Keats. He introduced a phrase. He used a phrase, negative capability. He said that Shakespeare was very good at it. And by negative capability, he says, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So, what he says is writers should be able to embrace different perspectives and create an array of characters. What you want to do is you want to show the friction, the tension of life, characters, their situations, fighting against each other and pushing up on the paper against each other. And you want your novel to capture that, the page to actually capture that. So that is what you hope that you are successful in doing.
Right. So this is about the characters you create on your pages. What about, have you or do you give thought to the readers who come to your pages? So while you're writing, somewhere at the corner of your mind, the likely readers and their connect with the characters that you're creating, does that also somewhere work at the subconscious level, if not at the conscious level, ma'am?
When a writer writes, you don't consciously have the reader in mind. The reader comes into the picture after the writing is over. I'd like to bring in what the Indian writer in English, Shashi Deshpande, has said. She's just come out with a volume of essays called Subversions. And she says the reader comes into the picture after the writing is over. So for a writer, it is, as I said, writers, it is a journey, it is an adventure. Writers may not know where they are headed and how they are going to go. So it is a process of communing with yourself, and you take the reader along with you on the way. So even if it may not be experiences you're describing, may not be the reader's experience, what you hope is that the logic of your characters, the logic of your narration, of the world that you're trying to create is convincing, that it appeals to them. Let me read what Shashi Deshpande says. What is ultimately communicated is a picture of the world as the writer sees it, a picture that comes out from somewhere deep within, often taking the writer herself by surprise. So you want your reader actually is your co-traveler. And as writers become more sure of themselves, they become more sure of their readers, they are ready to take risks. If you feel that, yes, I have the confidence of my reader, you can up the ante, you can try new things, you can extend the envelope either in form, structure, content, and you feel that, yes, this is going to make sense because I have a reader who has grown with me, who has who has expended imagination and time and energy to understand what I'm saying. Here again, uh, what Nabokov says, he says, what do you expect from a reader? What is the authentic instrument to be used by the reader? It is impersonal imagination and artistic delight. What should be established is an artistic, harmonious balance between the reader's mind and the author's mind. So that is what you hope for when you write. You want the reader to be your friend, and the kind of liberties that one would take with a friend. You extend yourself, you go out on a limb. That is what you want from the reader, ideally.
Right. So, but isn't it possible, ma'am, that some of your readers can actually connect very well with what you're saying because it represents their life in some way? And there may be some who cannot connect at all because that is not their situation in life. So have you had reviews or feedbacks which said there is a disconnect?
See, there is, you know what, if you have to be God in order to write about everything and everybody. So writing your particular story, it involves making a choice. You are writing from a particular point of view. You are writing about people in whom you have invested and who have occupied your thoughts. Now, what a writer hopes for is, uh, investing enough humanity in a particular character. For instance, if you are writing about an extremely affluent member of society, and you feel that for a person who is not as affluent or who has not had such an easy life, they may think, what is this? This doesn't mean anything to me. But basically, there is the human element in everybody. So there again, it depends upon the writer's ability. A writer should be able to convince any reader that yes, there is something. These may not be your experiences, but hey, give this person a try, or you turn the pages of this book. There may be something that might interest you. It may be the structure, it may be the form, it may be the sparkling dialogue. There may be other qualities which may bring you joy and which may benefit you in some way. That is my, what do you say?
Right.
My
yes. No. I understand it from the writer's perspective. What I'm driving at is, I get to hear that publishers try to drive your manuscript the reader way or the commercial way, saying this is the target audience and these many copies need to be sold. So yeah, so in that context, have you had actually publishers demanding a drastic change in what you have written or something like that? Has there been an experience of that kind, or is it possible that one comes across something like that if one ventures into this area?
See, let me share my experience. The manuscripts that I have submitted, the publishers, editors have given me feedback. They tend to give feedback to writers. But basically, what they have done is they have raised questions and they have asked me to introspect on certain aspects of the writing. So it is organic to the work. I can say quite honestly that rather than saying that something like this will not sell, I mean, it's not direct, but the comments are organic to the work itself. Once the publisher's editor is interested per se in your work, then they try and refine it For instance, my last novel, the comment was that it should be shortened. And I did find that when I went back to it and when I looked at it, even though it still remains a long novel, there were parts of it which I did edit successfully. So this process of editing is actually good for the writing. It is, I mean, it may not be good for the ego of the writer, but you have to understand that both the editor, the publisher's editor, and the writer, that is you are not working at cross purposes. Both of you want that the work should achieve its full potential. If you look at it that way, then you begin to trust your editor. You begin to trust the whole process of editing and of making sure that the manuscript reaches its best potential. There is this, there's an interesting phrase used by Muriel Spark in her novel called A Far Cry from Kensington, where one character describes the other as a pisser copy or a urinator of literary text. So you cannot be so self-indulgent. I keep thinking, yes, a gush of words always produces a slush of prose. So what the publisher's editor may do is to push you in a certain direction, to introspect, to see whether your work follows the logic that it set out with in the first place. Now, that said, there is definitely a kind of a tango that you have to dance here between being true to your own creativity. Creativity is sacred. You have to honor your muse. But at the same time, you have to honor the publisher's expectations and the publisher's commitments too. So I think in the interests of the work, it would be good to kind of ask the kind of questions. If you have certain doubts, I think it is good to come out into the open and ask your editor, ask your publisher's editor, what it is that is bothering you, so that you can work things out to the benefit of the manuscript. You keep that in the fore and work things out.
Right. I like this triad that you drew between the writer, the publisher, and the reader as a triad that should work together in unison.
Yes, right.
That's a beautiful idea.
Yes. That's
a beautiful idea.
It's a good way of putting it. Yes.
Yes, yeah. So I like that because I think that makes the whole process sound very positive and very productive. So thank you for that thought, ma'am. One question before I go to probably we can start closing our conversation slowly. But once you've finished a story or a book, sometimes some dregs, some remnants of that, keep coming back to your mind, which could maybe take the shape of another book or a sequel. Has it ever happened to you, or is it happening to you? I would like to know.
Actually, that is an idea that I haven't explored. Right now, strangely, I'm reading Virginia Woolf. I first read Mrs. Dalloway, which it's such a remarkable book. And after that, now I'm reading Voyage Out, in which she introduces Mr. and Mrs. Dalloway. So as sequels go and developing your characters go, that these are the two books that come to mind. It's possible if I can think of the way my characters grow, if they do grow organically, and I find that they have outlived their utility or they have outlived their span of life in one of the works in which I did conceive them, then maybe they can go on, they can age, they can capture the flavor of a different time. I could try it. Actually, Dr. Rani, thank you for giving me this idea. Maybe I can start thinking about it more seriously.
Yes, ma'am. That sounds hopeful that in another of our retreats in the future, we will have you discussing a new book maybe. And let's hope the seed is sown today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We look forward to that. So, since we also have students of English language in this,
Right.
I have one question about the language, the diction that you employ while you write. Are you
Right.
overtly conscious whether you want to employ the British English, the American English, or the educated Indian English? So, are you also very picky and choosy about the exact style in which you portray or you draw your characters?
Um, uh, Let me step back from this question a little to see how we are situated. You know, the paradox is that you are Indian. You, and possibly you belong to a particular, you have one of the Indian languages as your mother tongue, and you belong in the Indian reality. You have your own literary traditions. It may be the oral tradition of storytelling that many of us come from, which we are born into. And yet, your literary influences are overwhelmingly British and American, especially the formal structuring that you acquire as as you go into our formal education system. And this, I would say, is definitely true of writers who write in English. So, what I would say is, uh, I wouldn't really spend too much time worrying about it. I think we should accept this happy hybrid mix and work with it and take it forward. In our globalized world today, uh, people talk of going global, that is combining the global and the local. So, writers, new, old, aspiring writers, should use a medium with which they are comfortable, which comes to them naturally, which has grown organically from the influences that have played a part in their life, both formally and informally. Here, I want to quote a short poem by W.H. Auden, W.H. Auden's Shorts. He says, "A poet's hope to be like some valley cheese, local but prized elsewhere." Now, I want to amend it a little bit and say that what I would want to be is to be like the local cheese, prized locally and elsewhere. What we want is for our writing, ultimately, whatever you employ, whether it is Indian English or British English or American, what you want is to appeal to a universe of readers. You want your work to be convincing, you want your work to resonate with as many readers as possible. And for that, I think if writers are true to themselves, and they make a genuine effort to burnish whatever comes to them naturally, then they are in business. I would say that.
Right. So also, if I may add to what you just shared, in the Bharatiya culture, we are used to embracing everything that comes in. And I'm reminded of actually A.K. Ramanujan's, when you talked of Auden, I remembered A.K. Ramanujan's Small Scale Reflections of a Great House. And it talks about how everything that comes in stays in, and those lines. So I think in India, it is actually an amalgamation of everything that comes in, that we that not just in language, in probably our way of life and a lot of things that are happening. Like you said, we're truly global in a lot of sense.
Right. Ramanujan also speaks of, speaking Tamil in the kitchen with his mother and English outside, so the same person. We aren't tied to one language or even one persona. We acquire, different ways of being, different ways of speaking at different times. That is the richness of India, of our society, that we can have so many different interactions with different people and at different levels.
Right. So we will close with one word of advice from you to any aspiring writers here in our audience. Because as we started with, this is the age of authorpreneurship and a lot of self-publishing is happening. So if this in any way, this webinar, the retreat, triggers anybody to put down their thoughts and attempt becoming a writer, so to these aspiring writers, a word from you will carry a lot of significance, ma'am. So what would you advise our aspiring writers?
I would say read extensively, read different kinds of writing. It is only through extensive reading that you will be able to find your voice. You will be able to find what really appeals to you, what excites you. It may be a certain form, it may be your voice, it may be the subject matter. So if you want to emerge as a writer with certain predilections, that you want to develop your tastes, you want to develop your own style, your own structure, it comes through reading. It could be through a process of elimination. You suddenly discover that no, it is science fiction that interests me, it is crime writing that interests me. Métier. Poetry is my métier. You can come to that conclusion. So that is what will help you. And as you read more and as you start writing, you will also be able to stand by, you'll have the courage of your convictions. You will not be unafraid to make unconventional choices. You can strike out on your own. You will have a portfolio. You will have your own writing. It will be by so and so, by X. Okay, if your name is Asha, this is Asha's writing. This is how Asha writes. This is her voice. This is what she's interested in. You will emerge. Not organically, you will emerge as a writer. Your voice will find its way. So you needn't be swayed by the herd, the flavor of the season or which writer has won an award. It is through reading and through writing, through thinking. You also need a certain amount of quiet time. Reading where you can be by yourself, you can still your mind. It is like an act of meditation. And if you read, it gives you time to commune with yourself, to introspect, so that your tastes can emerge. And it's also not necessary that you confine yourself to one medium or to one subject. I would like to, talk about the Kannada writer, short story writer and poet, Jayant Kaikini. His latest volume of short stories, which has been translated, has been winning many awards. But Jayant Kaikini is also a lyricist for Kannada film songs. He is also regarded as a very fine lyricist of Kannada film songs. So once you discover what your métier is, you will be able to explore different ways of expressing yourself. That is, I don't know if it's a practical tip, but that is the way you could proceed. Before I leave, Dr. Rani, there's one thing that I would like to talk about with your students, since they are research scholars and they are students of English literature. What does literature, what does fiction actually mean? Here, I'd like to flag Zadie Smith. Zadie Smith is a British writer of Jamaican, a part Jamaican heritage. And she talks about how fiction came to mean something to her. She says she was very young. She was about 11 years old when she read E.M. Foster's A Room with a View. And that book, it brought her first intimation of what fiction means. She said she loved the book and she thought it was a good thing. It brought good to her and she felt good reading it. But later, possibly as she became a student of literature, as she started thinking about literature from an analytical framework, she withdrew more and more from her initial affective response. And she also began to think that she realized that serious people did not think of literature this way. And she felt that maybe her initial affective response was sentimental. And as she studied literature, so to say, she also became aware of certain things like canonical bias. If you prefer one book to another, maybe you're exhibiting it. And also, if you admit that a book can do good, or even that it is interrogating what good means, it is being moralistic. So these are concerns that you get sidetracked with, or rather you get preoccupied with as and when you start analyzing a text. It is not that you mustn't do it, but I feel for a writer and a reader, what is necessary is to make the connection between your initial affective response, the love that you felt for a particular book, and your cerebral analysis of it. It is when you connect the two, that literature or fiction comes a full circle, where as a student of literature you are able, you still remember why you were drawn to stories, to a particular book in the first place, and cerebrally you are able to analyze it and say, yes, it is the characters, it is the pace of the narrative, it is the structure, it is the dialogue, this is what works in this novel, and this is what goes to making it good, and this is what made me love the book in the first place. Thank you. This is what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. That's some sound technical advice to read literature scientifically, I should say. And that brings me to the thought that Sir C.P. Snow, I think, proposed in his Read lecture, which talked about the two cultures and which said science and humanities cannot be traveling two different tracks. We have to meet to solve the problems of the world holistically. So
Yes.
encouraging readers of literature, or rather students of literature, to read literature scientifically will probably fulfill this requirement to some extent.
Yes.
So as we close, we have been conferring on reading and writing. So I think it is best concluded by recalling what Sir Francis Bacon said when he said, "Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man." So even to be a writer, even to venture upon authorpreneurship, to become somebody known like Madam Usha, who is in front of us, we need to begin by reading and then conferring about our reading maybe, and then maybe sit down to write. So while I want to express our immense thankfulness to Madam Usha for sparing her time, for sparing her kind advice and experience in this area, I also wish our viewers the very best in their literary pursuits. Even if they are not students of literature, I think literature must and should play a large role in shaping us into rounded personalities. Thank you so very much. Thank you, ma'am. It was a great pleasure having this conversation with you. I'm sure there is much to carry home for the viewers and the listeners. We hope to be in touch with you and to have many more such fruitful, productive conversations. Thank you so very much. Thank you, viewers.
Thank you, Dr. Rani, for giving me this opportunity to converse with you and your students. And I hope you have a good webinar. And I hope that this conversation has provided students and writers some takeaways that they can mull over. And I hope it means something. It has resonated with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. The pleasure is entirely ours. Thank you.
Mine too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. This conversation allowed us listeners to view creative writing as an expression of the multiple truths one embodies as we ride the waves of life. Thank you, madam, for also sharing with us your experience of the publishing process and enriching our awareness of the same. With this, we come to the end of the proceedings of the morning session. Hope you all enjoyed surfing with the author's journeys and insights derived therefrom. Now we shall break for lunch and join back at 2 p.m. for equally interesting afternoon sessions. Sai Ram.